Welcome to the first national conversation on EV infrastructure. My name is Diane Dwyer, and I am a broadcast journalist with NBC and KTVU Channel 2 in the San Francisco Bay Area, and I will be guiding today's event. So welcome. Today's summit is about bold action. We will be featuring the very first public appearance of the two deputy secretaries from the Departments of Energy and Transportation, and they will share plans for delivering the Biden administration's historic investment in EV infrastructure. You are also going to hear from CEOs and organizations with commitments to action, including new investments. And finally, you will learn from experts addressing the key challenges and opportunities in this expanding and exciting field. So on behalf of the EV Charging Initiative, I want to thank everyone, the panelists, the members of the administration and National EV Charging Initiative, EV enthusiasts, including myself, and the press for joining us today. And also a big thank you to the e-mobility advisors for organizing this initiative. So with over 2,000 of you viewing, it is clear people are excited and interested in this subject. This is going to be great. It is time. Let's get bold, America. Let's get ready for action on electric vehicle charging. On that note, let's get started right away. I would like to now invite Manish Bapna, CEO and President of the Natural Resources Defense Council, the initiative's strategic partner, to begin this in-depth conversation. And with that, Manish, I will turn it over to you.
Thank you, Diane, for that inspiring welcome. It's truly a delight to be with all of you today to provide some opening remarks at the EV Charging Initiative Summit. It was 61 years ago, on this very day, January 20th, that John F. Kennedy gave his inaugural presidential address. In that address, he said, "United, there is little we cannot do in a host of cooperative ventures. Divided, there is little we can do, for we dare not meet a powerful challenge at odds and split asunder." He was speaking about how to overcome the Cold War, but the same can be said about the climate crisis. I don't need to tell anyone on this call about the urgency, the importance of tackling climate change, or the critical role that cutting pollution from the nation's cars and trucks represents. We all know the stakes are incredibly high, but so is the opportunity. And we all have an essential role to play. Collectively, we can spark and scale the transformative change that will create the jobs, build a healthier, more equitable, more prosperous world. We have the technology. Already on our streets, we have over 2 million electric cars and trucks and counting. Now we just need to hit the accelerator. And that starts with making it easier to charge those vehicles where people live, where they work, where they play. President Biden laid out a plan on how we can get there. His Build Back Better agenda included a bold pledge to put in place 500,000 public charging stations worldwide. And the infrastructure bill that was recently passed by Congress makes a down payment on that. It provides $7 billion to help meet that goal. It's historic, but the reality is we know we're going to need a lot more to get to where we need to get by 2030. Paraphrasing JFK once again, what he said on this day in 1961, the EV Charging Initiative, we're here today not to ask only what a country can do for us, but what we can do to help our country meet our shared goals. That's why we're here. And the people of this country are ready for it. 62% of Americans support building a nationwide network of charging stations. And just as the costs of climate inaction are becoming impossible to ignore, so are the benefits of climate action. It turns out people like saving money. We're sick of being held hostage to the unpredictable spikes at the gas pump, with electricity rates holding steady at the cost equivalent of about $1 a gallon of gas. EVs are a welcome change for our wallets. And that's especially true for those families who spend a disproportionate share of their income on gas. People want a world that is healthier, more prosperous, more equitable, a world that gives our children more reason to be hopeful. Today, we're going to hear from administration officials tasked with realizing the president's vision. We're going to hear from so many of you, people committed to making the change we need happen. We've been spurred to come together today to bring together a diverse range of interests and perspectives, but united in our shared vision of a national charging network that will bring about the full transformation to zero emission transportation future. And together we can build it. So let's get to work. And it's my honor now to turn the virtual microphone over to Secretary of Energy, Jennifer Granholm, whose agency is pivotal to these efforts. Delighted to be with you. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Manish. And hello, everybody. It's so great to be with you virtually anyway. And I want to thank all of y'all, including the e-mobility advisors and everybody who's organizing and participating in the National EV Charging Initiative. This administration knows that the future is electric. And in August, the president set the goalpost. 50% of our new vehicles need to be electric by 2030. And the U.S. auto sector is already rallying in support. And so to get there, we've got to make sure that every American can get an electric vehicle and can get wherever they want to go in that electric vehicle, whether it's plugging in at their local grocery store or going on a cross-country road trip. But we've got a lot of work ahead. So many Americans do not have access to EV charging at home. And so many Americans live in what's called a charging desert, where they can't find any place to plug in, especially in low-income neighborhoods or in rural areas and in communities of color. And that is why President Biden is working toward a national network of 500,000 EV chargers wherever people live or work or play or travel. It's going to be a network that fills these gaps and provides convenient charging for all and focuses on the communities that need it most. So 1 year in, this administration has already taken big strides toward that goal. The president's bipartisan infrastructure law provides $7.5 billion for EV charging. It forms a joint office between the Department of Energy and the Department of Transportation jointly to deploy that infrastructure. And that particular office is going to be collaborative. It's going to provide technical assistance and support to state governments as they get EV chargers into their communities. And it's going to seek a partnership from all of you, private companies and community groups, local leaders. You'll learn a lot more about this new office later today from the Deputy Secretaries, David Turk and Polly Tottenberg. So charging infrastructure is absolutely crucial, but it is just one piece of the puzzle. We need the rest of President Biden's Build Back Better agenda to really turbocharge, if you will, the U.S. EV market. Electric vehicles are only as clean as the electrons that are going into them. So we're working toward 100% clean electricity by 2035, and the clean energy tax credits in Build Back Better are going to help us do just that. We need to invest in the supply chain for EV batteries to make more of them here in America with American workers. That $7 billion for the bipartisan infrastructure law is a great start. And Build Back Better has over $100 billion in clean energy manufacturing investments. And we're going to make EVs more affordable for every American. Already, EV owners save about $600 per year and about $8,000 over the life of the vehicle, thanks in part to actually DOE's work to slash battery costs. Build Back Better, though, is going to cut the cost of an electric vehicle by up to $12,500 through rebates for businesses and consumers off the top at the dealer. So taken together, an electric future comes into focus, and with it, jobs, and more jobs. Building batteries, building electric vehicles, chargers in every pocket of the country. President Biden and his entire administration are committed to getting it done, but really we need your help. We certainly are ready to roll up our sleeves alongside community advocates and state and local governments to speed adoption of EVs and charging infrastructure. And we need the private sector to really multiply the impact of this new federal investment and to help put EV chargers in every community. And we need the best and brightest and most passionate and diverse leaders to join us here at DOE to get this work done. So last week, we launched the Clean Energy Corps to staff up our new joint office on EV charging and to deploy a whole host of clean energy technologies. We are recruiting more than 1,000 new colleagues, and we want you to consider yourself as one of them, or maybe apply. So if you are interested, please visit energy.gov/cleanenergycorps and submit your resume. So whoever you are, wherever you are in the EV space, we look forward to working with you as we transform our nation's transportation sector and tackle the climate crisis. Thank you so much, and I hope you have a terrific rest of your summit.
And thank you so much, Secretary Granholm. 1,000 new jobs at the Department of Energy. Let's do this. We can actually make this happen. All right. So in case you didn't know, the National EV Charging Initiative is a year-long effort to guide the deployment of a charging ecosystem that ensures all EV drivers and fleet operators have quick and easy access to charging when they go electric. That's the whole key here, right? That's the only way to really make EV mainstream. So it is now my pleasure to introduce Carla Peterman, Executive Vice President of Corporate Affairs and Chief Sustainability Officer at Pacific Gas and Electric, who will moderate our first panel, focusing on the initiative's guiding principles. And joining her on stage are two essential members of President Biden's leadership team discussing the unprecedented collaboration on EV charging, the Joint Office of Energy and Transportation. So please welcome Polly Trottenberg, Deputy Secretary of Department of Transportation. And then unfortunately, David Turk, Deputy Secretary of the Department of Energy, was called away unexpectedly, but have no fear, Michael Berube, Deputy Assistant Secretary for Sustainable Transportation at the DOE in the Office of Energy Efficiency and Renewable Energy, is stepping in his place. Thank you, Michael, for doing that. And Carla, I will turn it over to you.
Thank you very much, Diane, and welcome Deputy Secretary Trottenberg and Deputy Assistant Secretary Berube. It is a pleasure to be with everyone today, and hello to everyone out there. We are thrilled to have two leading officials of the Biden administration together making this joint appearance here to discuss the Biden administration's efforts to build out a national electric vehicle charging network and preview their collaborative oversight of the Joint Office of Energy and Transportation. I am personally very excited to moderate this discussion. I have a passion for both electricity and transportation, so this is going to be fun. Having led public funding efforts to deploy electric vehicles and chargers during my time in California government, I know how essential public funding and public-private partnerships are to making progress. Now at PG&E, I am seeking ways we can partner with others to grow electrification. 1 in 5 U.S. electric vehicles are in PG&E's service area, and we are proud that to date, we have installed over 5,000 charging ports through our utility charging programs, with nearly 40% of those ports in disadvantaged communities. In today's discussion, we will learn more about how we can collectively scale electric transportation in all of our communities. So let's get to it. We have arrived at an historic moment in the nation's journey to the clean transportation future. The convergence of strong government leadership, rapidly maturing technology, and growing private sector investment. President Biden, as Secretary Granholm just shared, has set ambitious goals for climate action, including for electric vehicle adoption. The Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act commits $7.5 billion for EV charging infrastructure and establishes a new joint DOE-DOT office whose mission includes setting guidance and standards for grant programs, as well as planning for the grid integration and freight infrastructure. So my first question is for both of you. What are the visions and values of the Biden administration that stand behind your approach as we build out this national EV charging network? Deputy Secretary Trottenberg, I welcome your comments.
Thanks, Carla. And I'm thrilled to be here today while admitting Secretary Granholm is a tough act to follow. So I I hope we get to follow on her really inspirational remarks. And I'm going to now quote Diane Dwyer. Let's get bold, America, because that is a great quote. This is our moment to be bold. And I know Michael and I will sort of get into some of the details of how at the government level we're implementing this, but I want to take a minute to just sort of celebrate. I know with a lot of the folks on this call today, the place we find ourselves. And Carla, you summed it up well with absolutely historic infrastructure legislation, incredible funding ahead of us, deep expertise on the technology, on the ground, practical experience. You've had it in California. I had it in New York. I was New York City's transportation commissioner before this job, and had started to do part of that work about how we get that infrastructure in sort of complicated urban terrain. And I think just to start with one of the values, something we're talking about here today, partnership and collaboration. I had a chance to serve at the Department of Transportation in the Obama administration, where we created the Partnership for Sustainable Communities, which was a lot of work, particularly with DOT, HUD, and EPA. And I realized in hindsight, we weren't working enough with the Department of Energy. And so for me, it is particularly thrilling to have this partnership with Michael and his team, with my counterpart, Dave Turk, because we're not going to get this done unless our two agencies are working together hand in glove. And in particular, DOE has tremendous technological expertise, but what DOT is going to bring to the table is how do we make electric vehicles and electric charging an integrated part of our transportation network? And that is no small feat. So that partnership with the Department of Energy, and I might say the partnership with, as you mentioned, Carla, public, private, so many other sort of pieces of this puzzle, incredibly important. And I think at the top of our list. A couple other areas I think won't surprise this group for this administration. Obviously, equity, a key priority for us, making sure, particularly on the public sector side, and we're thinking a lot about this at DOT, and I know, interacting with probably a lot of the folks on this call, how do we make sure that as we build out that network, that we're reaching all parts of the country, that we're reaching low-income communities, that we're reaching places where perhaps the private sector is not going to naturally want to invest in this infrastructure, so that these benefits that they will be shared widely across the country. And this particularly for an administration that has made Justice 40 a big priority, which is, particularly making sure that the investments in clean energy are going to communities that have been, disadvantaged and most impacted in a lot of places by, environmental damage. Accessibility, another big value for us, and I know Michael probably will want to talk about this too, but how do we, first of all, just in the basic sense, make the infrastructure accessible to all in terms of making sure that it's accessible to people with disabilities, that it's in places where people can reach it. But again, that broader accessibility, we are focusing first on, for example, creating those highway corridors, and working very closely with states on that to make sure that, particularly, for example, in rural areas, you will be able to get to a charger as you are traveling across the country. And then how do we work on that accessibility in denser urban areas, and particularly a place like New York, for example, where many people park their cars on the streets and don't have easy access to a garage. So, partnership, equity, accessibility, I think big priorities for us. And just sort of to close, because I think, Carla, you hit on this. We also approach this task with great excitement of all the partnership out there with all of you. It's thrilling for me to have DOT and DOE have a joint office and be joined at the hip, but we also know we're going to need the help of a lot of folks all over the country to get this done. So thank you.
Thank you. Deputy Assistant Secretary Barry V. Welcome.
Thank you very much, Carla. And Deputy Secretary Trachtenberg hit it right on in terms of it is so exciting to be working together across the agencies so well. And the agencies have always had good working relations, but we are really taking this to a new level. I think, I have seen all of the exciting work over the last, really 6-8 months that we've been doing very closely together. I think that will become more in focus for all of you as you're seeing this really important program roll out. I would maybe just, I'll underscore a few key things that Deputy Secretary mentioned. Affordable, accessible, reliable. When we think about the EV charging network, many of us who are probably listening here, a number of you probably drive EVs like I do, but we're not the representative group out there. And sales have been amazing. I worked for many years in the automotive industry, and we are now trending in the last handful of months at 5% of all sales being electric. Europe just hit 20%. So it is an exciting future, but we have to remember, for most Americans, right, they're not necessarily focused on that, and they're focused on their transportation working for them. The promise of EVs, the climate benefits, of course, are a key point, but affordability. EVs, as Secretary Granholm said, are an opportunity to cut the cost of transportation, which is one of the highest costs for a typical American household. But to do that, to achieve that $600 a year in savings, you need to have good, reliable, affordable charging. So I think as we build out this network, we're going to be very focused on making sure we deliver on that promise of affordability, accessibility, and that means accessible for all Americans, in rural areas, in underserved communities, as well as in cities, and for those that don't have charging where they park their car at night. That will become an increasingly important issue for us to solve as the number of EVs sold go up. Today at 5%, maybe there aren't that many of those people that are in that case, but as we get to 50% of sales and more, then we really have to have ready solutions for those people in that situation as well. And of course, addressing environmental justice, air quality has got to be thought about here as well. Climate change is the existential crisis in front of us, as Manish said. But we have to also remember that along the way of addressing that, we have to be continuing to improve the air quality, especially in those communities that have taken the brunt of transportation-related environmental impacts. Carla, I look forward to getting into more of the discussion and more of the details here.
Great, thank you both. Can tell already how aligned you are in terms of where we need to go in the vision. So as you may know, the National EV Charging Initiative submitted a set of guiding principles to both Secretary Buttigieg and Secretary Granholm. The guiding principles serve as the initiative's compass as we continue this journey towards a clean transportation future. They convey shared values to the public and policymakers, to the private sector and financial community, and to those tasked with investing public dollars to accelerate transportation electrification. They point to actions we all must take individually and collectively, and they signal our commitment to collaborate, innovate, and scale for efforts to meet the need. So I would like to direct the next few questions to subjects raised in the document, which can be found on the National EV Charging Initiative's website. So Deputy Secretary Trottenberg, this new joint office between DOE and DOT is an important recognition of the need for collaboration in the federal government to deploy EV charging. How will this new office operate, and what is the timeline?
Thanks, Carl. It's a great question. And I want to just take a minute, I hope Michael will agree with me here, to just note, this may not, to some quarters, this may not, joint office, but just in the federal government, we are very siloed. I think a lot of folks on this call probably know that. And I think this is something pretty unique and very exciting to set up, but I'll also say we don't totally have a template. So, we're going to learn as we go. The two agencies have signed a memorandum of understanding, which is sort of making sure we're leveraging the expertise of both, both agencies. Some of you may have seen, actually, our two secretaries went to the signing together in an electric vehicle. So nice, nice synergy there. And again, for us, we're going to bring, I think, that transportation know-how, that connection to state and local DOTs, to sort of the partners we're going to need on the ground in the transportation sector. And Michael, I think we'll talk about sort of the deep expertise that DOE is going to bring. I have to say, I think one thing that Secretary Granholm did that was very clever, I'm going to steal it, is she talked about we're going to need folks to staff up. And we have a lot of jobs also at DOT, and we too are looking for experts here. But that's also sort of the fun, is the two agencies, I think, will be looking at folks together who I think can bring, sort of an incredibly well-rounded set of skills to what is truly, an interdisciplinary challenge, but also, I think, I don't know, Michael, tell me if you disagree, I think a pretty unprecedented new partnership.
Oh, no, this is so true. When we first talked about the concept and the idea, that was one of the first questions, right? Well, where has it been done? And there are not many examples of this. But, as I mentioned, I came from the private sector before coming to DOE 5 or 6 years ago, and it just makes so much sense, right? Both agencies pulling together, bringing the expertise together. So I know that across the private sector, this will be heralded as a great move.
Well, I know I've been sending out information about upcoming jobs to my network, and people are excited about the opportunities.
Thank you.
Good.
Keep doing that. We're going to need, I think the secretary said 1,000 people. We at DOT will be hiring over 1,000 people. This is a credible opportunity for folks to come to the federal government at one of the most exciting moments. If you care about climate, if you care about equity, here's your chance. Get in and help us deliver.
That's awesome. So Deputy Assistant Secretary Barry B., I wanted to ask you more about, as after the staffing up, when does this national network take off? Like, what will people see this year in 2022?
Well, the activity has started in earnest. We've had quite a bit of stakeholder outreach already. This is a big program, a $7.5 billion overall program, and the goal is nothing short of a truly united national network. So we want to get that right. And that means a lot of collaboration. It means a lot of working across all of the states, departments of transportation, the energy and environmental offices, the utilities and public utility commissions. I'm sure, Carla, you can relate to from your position as well. So you will be seeing a guidance document come out in mid-February. That guidance document will really be the beginning of a very deep collaboration where states are developing and leading the development of plans. But we at the federal government level in the joint office will be working very closely to support the states, provide them with the data, the information, the know-how in that process. And that will really then lay out a process of getting the plans out there, then getting the plans approved. And then we certainly hope to start seeing your initial chargers this year. But our point really is, let's get it right. Let's make sure we have a good national plan, and then we execute.
That's great. And Deputy Secretary Trottenberg, you mentioned that the chargers have to be available for everyone. People who rent, people who live in apartments. What's the joint office going to do to ensure that we have an integrated, holistic charging strategy that meets the needs of everyone?
It's a great question. I think I sort of will just build, I think on one of the first steps of that Michael mentioned, the guidance we're going to put out and then working with states on the state plans. And I want to note, state plans, we're sort of working through state DOTs, but, Carla, obviously state utilities, state energy commissions, they're going to be other players that the states are going to bring to the table. And they're going to need to be working with a lot of, I think, the groups represented here on the ground locally as well, because we want plans that are going to get at exactly what you're talking about. How do we make sure in a pragmatic way we are getting this technology everywhere it needs to go? How does that work practically? How do the funding streams work? Where does it make sense for public investment? Where might we rely more on private investment? What are the regulatory challenges we face? And that may be different state to state and city to city. So I think, this office is hopefully going to be working on the ground with states and localities to sort of work through those details and make sure that these plans, for which we will base obviously sort of funding decisions, achieve, I think, all the priorities you're hearing about here today, accessibility, equity. I think Michael mentioned affordability, reliability, that we're hitting all those key priorities.
That's great. And just, continuing on that comment around affordability, Deputy Assistant Secretary Barry B., do you want to expand a bit about specifically how you're thinking about meeting the needs of underserved communities and making sure that there's access and affordability?
Yeah, it is so critically important. And it's not necessarily an easy question. I mean, there's a few things maybe to point out. The goal of the program, right, and especially the initial focus is really on building out those national corridors, coast to coast, and covering all of the country. So from that point of view, we're going to make sure we're hitting, all communities, rural spaces, urban spaces, everywhere where there are interstates and major travel corridors across the board. So that will provide a certain backbone of access and equity, but we need to go much further than that. And I think one of the key things we would recommend from our work in this space over the years, as states and others on the call are helping us with that, is making sure we're taking the time to listen to communities, to spend the time with people in those communities. it's difficult sometimes for people outside the community to say, well, what would benefit someone? Hey, I'll put this charger in this community because I believe it's an underserved community. Well, just putting a charger there may not address the issues. Where that charger goes, is the charger, what level, at the right time? Who are you actually serving in there? So these things transcend a traditional business decision, and that's why it's a key role of government to help. We will, through the joint office, be working with states on those environmental justice plans, working also within the federal administration on the Environmental Justice 40, the EJ 40 initiative, overall federal initiative, to make sure that the benefits of the infrastructure bill overall are serving these communities. So it's going to be a joint effort is really the key, Carla. We don't have like the magic bullet by any means, but communication and talking and working with the communities directly is going to be key.
Can I just jump in to add to what Michael said very eloquently? We don't have a magic bullet, but here's the good news. I think as we're pointing out, we're starting to see EV adoption pick up around the country. We can see what our counterparts in Europe have done. Like we do have a lot of good lessons and templates. So, I think there has been a lot of great work to build on. So I think that's part of what makes this exciting. There's a lot we're going to learn, but there is a lot we already know.
I will just say at the state level, where the Deputy Secretary came from more recently in New York, other states. Now, there are a lot of states out there who have done good work in this space. So we want to learn from that and help really spread the best practices across the country.
Well said. I was actually just going to pick up on that and say, first of all, I love the idea of co-creating with communities and community leaders and community groups. As I shared with our EV charging programs, 40% of the chargers are in underserved communities. And when you started these programs, you wondered, would that target be possible? But there was such interest and there's such support. And so, I think this is a great focus area, and so glad to hear the passion that both of you have around this topic. So, that's probably a good transition to talking about how do you partner with companies like ours? How do you partner with the private sector? Manish pointed out in the beginning just the value of doing that. And I know this initiative is all about joining the private sector together to step up and match the ambition of the federal government. So, Deputy Secretary Trottenberg, can you start off by sharing how do you view the role of the private sector versus the role of government? And what can companies do to help the Biden administration meet and exceed the 500,000 charger goal?
I'll give a quick answer on that, and I think Michael probably will be able to get in deeper on that, because I think it is interesting. This is new territory for USDOT. I will just say that up front, and we have spent a lot of time and thinking with our colleagues at DOE about how do we get that right? How does the private sector participate? How are we ensuring they come to the table, but we're setting basic standards, that we're doing a lot of things that are in the public interest, but that we're not supplanting private investment where it makes sense for private investment to occur. Again, I think for USDOT, that's going to be part of sort of our learning process and part of what we're going to be working with states in their state plans. But I think, as we sort of said at the outset of this call, we recognize that they're essential partners. And just throughout my government experience, I've always, in my work with the private sector, have always wanted to encourage them to be the innovators that they can be, and to let them have that space to do that. And obviously to find places to make a profit, but as the public sector partner, to make sure that we are safeguarding the public priorities, the ones that we're talking about here so passionately, particularly equity and access. So I think each set of players will bring something to the table. But again, for DOT, this is going to be some interesting new partnerships for us.
Yeah, Carl, I'll jump in and say that we have a lot of history of working across the industry, whether it be from automakers to the EVSE companies and utilities, just to name three kind of key groups in there. I think one of the number one things that we have heard from all those groups is they need the federal government to step up, set the vision, set the direction, point where we're going. So I think we have done that. The guidance document, we will do that. Not oversubscribed, but everyone agrees we need a national network. We need to go. And at the end of the day, we just got to kind of line up. So there are some things where we think it will make sense to set national guidance on and how payments work and things that will help ensure accessibility, and partly just to call the ball a little bit to kind of set some of that that guidance. It will be very important to get input from everyone. There is a open request for information RFI docket if people haven't submitted comments and thoughts that they'd like to. But let me also say the guidance document comes out isn't like the end all and it's like written in stone forever. This is a process that we'll be going through together. It's a multi-year program and initiative. We will start out, I think, on a good foot and we'll just improve better from there. But private sector investment separate from the federal dollars will be critical. The goal of getting to 50% of all new vehicle sales by 2030 and then growing beyond that as well will require more than the 500,000 chargers, right? So this is a huge down payment, a huge start to that, but we anticipate significant ongoing private investment and opportunities, quite honestly, in many different places across this ecosystem, which is very exciting.
That's terrific. And, as you said, there is no shortage of need. So there's a great opportunity to step up. And I love that you've set the bar high, given us a North Star, and now all of us can meet that challenge. And I think maybe there's some healthy competition about how we can step up and innovate and have some of those firsts. So you just both started to touch on the fact that this is a national network. We have incredibly diverse geography in the United States, different customer types, et cetera. Important themes that came up through the submitted questions were all about how is this going to work in real life? Questions around interoperability, reliability, and maintenance. So Deputy Secretary Trottenberg, can you start off by sharing how the Joint Office will address these key aspects of the driver experience? And can you share any specifics on the standards we can expect to see from the Joint Office? Any previews?
It's a great question. And I think Michael was sort of starting to touch on it in his last answer. It's sort of an expectation in the industry. We're going to allow room for innovation, but we have to set some standards. Standards of sort of interoperability and sort of a bunch of those technological standards. And Michael I think will do a better job of getting into the details of those. But I think at the DOT level, we recognize we need to set those basic standards, and we need to grow this industry domestically. Part of what our RFI has been looking at is how we do that. So that's just another component we want to put out there, something I know our secretaries and President Biden hold near and dear, that this is also an incredible economic opportunity for the country, an opportunity to grow an industry, to put people to work in new clean jobs, to sort of grow something which will have lasting impact in terms of not only our environmental, tackling the climate crisis, but sort of the American manufacturing side of the house. I think part of that process, and Michael jump in, is again, we're sort of the RFI, which is, by the way, the request for information for those who don't know the Washington jargon, is to start to get that input from industry and from experts like a lot of folks on this call. I think in this case, we probably don't have all the answers quite yet. Because once we set those federal standards, they're going to be what we're all going to innovate towards and live with. So, this is partially that learning process. But I don't know, Michael, what did I miss?
Yeah, I would just say, something that you mentioned earlier, particularly, we're not starting from scratch here. There has been a good amount of work in deployment of EV charging, both by the federal government initially, really going back to the Recovery Act, leading some of that, and the private sector picking up. So I think we have learned from that, and we're going to deploy what we think is a forward-looking set of guidance and ultimately requirements. Because this is a network that is going to grow, and it's going to be the network that we're going to keep building out through 2030 and beyond. So we want to make sure that it meets the needs not just now, but of the future, where we can anticipate technology going. In some cases, it will make sense to be ready for the future, but not necessarily spend now, right? Sometimes you want to dig once with no upgrade later, though, in other places. So building more chargers, things like that. Upgrading existing chargers. There's already, a significant network out there of DC fast chargers along corridors, many more level 2. In some cases, that's good. And maybe we just need to expand what we have and improve what we have. And that will be part of what we can do. And that can also help us get some of this out more quickly as well. But I think you'll be seeing more information on that in the upcoming guidance. We certainly encourage comments and feedback across all of those things. We want to do this collaboratively. One thing I will say, because people ask all the time, is if I drive an EV, I got all these different cards, all these different apps. How do I do it? A core principle we have is we want to make this experience as comfortable and convenient for consumers as it is today to fuel their vehicles. We want to make it as easy and as universally accessible. And as you start talking about, this is for the entire population. This isn't just for a small group or a niche. This is to meet all American needs. You have to think about people across the entire socioeconomic spectrum, how they pay typically, things like that. So those will be some of the principles we'll be applying.
I love that. I also love how you're talking about just future-proofing the system. Folks are like my family. My parents keep their cars for 15 years. And so I know they'll be thinking about how will they be able to participate in this network. So I just really appreciate, again, that really common sense approach that you both are taking to these questions. So let's talk about the fuel side. And this is for Deputy Assistant Secretary Berube. I know this is dear to your heart. How is the grid going to be able to support all of these vehicles? We know that a reliable, resilient, accessible, ecologically sustainable, and economical supply of electricity is foundational to secure and timely and affordable transition to EVs. So how are you thinking about structuring incentives and regulations to leverage utility investment and participation?
Well, Carla, you got it exactly right. EVs are only as clean as the fuel that's going in them. Today, just so there's no misunderstanding, even today in our current grid, an electric vehicle is a significant greenhouse gas improvement, certainly a significant NOx improvement, local air quality improvement over a gasoline vehicle. But the goal that we have set for the administration and collectively as a country is to achieve 100% clean grid by 2035. That is a huge, huge goal, as anyone in the energy side and utility industry knows. But one of the key things is that we believe if we work towards transportation electrification and moving towards 100% clean grid, obviously a very high level of renewables, if we do those simultaneously, they can support each other. So one of the things called out in the infrastructure law for this network that will be important is smart charging. The idea of how do you have a network that can interact with the grid and help provide load leveling across the grid. Now, that might be a little harder on DC fast charging on corridors, but there are some aspects there, local storage, for example. But certainly as we get into more level 2 charging and some of the discretionary grant programs, working with communities, that will become a really important factor to help future-proof the electric charging. One other key point I would just say is working with utilities and public utility commissions will be critical. So for all those that are on the state side of this, I definitely say, as you start laying out your state plan, please make utilities one of your first stops on that path. If you hand them a plan once it's written, that will be probably a more expensive plan to implement and a longer one than if you work up front collaboratively across that space. In the joint office, we will do our part working across the utility spectrum, from investor-owned to municipal to rural co-ops, to help collectively work with them and help bring them to the states and vice versa, be a little bit of that partner matchmaking so that we can all do this together.
Can I just double down on one thing Michael said at the end there, sort of bringing the utilities to the table, just sort of someone who's had practical experience with this in the New York context, 100% true that you can sort of have your whole plan, what you want to do on the streets, but it turns out if your utility isn't sort of teed up, has the capacity, ready to make the investments to meet that side of the equation, your plan is going to slow down really quickly. So those partnerships, I've just seen it at the local level, essential to get right from the start.
You're so right.
One of the things I hear, and Carla, you can relate to this in your role. When I talk to utility executives, I hear them say, "Hey, we don't want to be the roadblock," and then the auto companies, "Hey, we don't want to be the roadblock. We'll have the cars there, right?" We in government say, "Okay, well, we'll do our part." So there's a little bit here of competition, which is great. I think all of us say, "Hey, we don't want to be the last leg here." So, but it will take us all working together to make that happen.
You are so right about that. And these are all big institutions with long histories. And so the more we can collaborate early on, we can adapt our processes. And as you've touched upon, electric vehicles are a great benefit to the grid, right? It's mobile storage. It can ultimately help with integrating renewables. It can help to lower the price of electricity by having more load. So really a lot of nice synergies. So I'm going to just get a little more geeked out for a second on the grid. And so I wanted to ask Deputy Assistant Secretary Berube, how can we streamline regulation including interconnection agreements to promote faster deployment for fleets, depots, et cetera. Take us there.
Yeah, I think that one of the first things is, imagine in 6-8 months from now, we will have 50 state plans covering the entire country that lays out the next 5 years of EV charging. That hasn't existed. So imagine for every public utility commission out there. To some degree, that's what they've been asking for. What's the plan? When are you going to build it? And there's money behind it. So I think that in and of itself will go a huge way. The fact that we have a plan and now, okay, we can focus on what's the right way to execute it economically and with the utilities. A second piece, maybe at a little more detailed level, I think we have to get into the soft cost questions. By soft cost, I mean the permitting, the local level issues. There's a whole range of them. And here we're going to borrow what we've learned from the solar industry. We've had a lot of experience in this country at deploying solar. That's further ahead than EV chargers. And we learned a lot about soft cost. And quite honestly, it became a bit of the roadblock. So through the joint office, we are going to be developing some different tools using what we've learned in solar that hopefully can be used at the community level, at the state level to try to help address those. And then I think also developing best practices. If we can look across, and this is, the beauty of having 50 states to work through, right, is that you have a lot of opportunities for different learnings in different places, different things are being tried, and we can share that. The challenge, of course, is you have 50 different states to work and coordinate through. That's where DOT will be so helpful. This is something that DOE doesn't have to do as much. So, but I know DOT has great experience.
DOT would always say 50 states plus Puerto Rico, the District of Columbia, and the territories. So just they're even add all our players in.
Absolutely.
Well, yeah, thank you for that. And as you know, so many of these regulations are local, even sub-state. And so I'm hearing from you a call for action and a call for response for folks to share what their best practices are. And it's a great chance to spotlight some of our American hometowns as well and the work that they're doing.
Yeah,
so,
definitely.
This has just been a wonderful conversation, and opportunity to hear from both of you really excites me about what the joint office is going to do. I'd like to give you both now a couple minutes each just to share any final thoughts with us, including what you want the listeners here today to be able to be able to support this laudable goal we have. Deputy Secretary Trottenberg, why don't you start us off?
Sorry, I didn't unmute myself. Thanks, Carla, and thanks again for this great discussion. It's great to be here with Michael from DOE, and I hope you're hearing, as you say, how excited we are to be working together. It is perhaps more groundbreaking than people might know. And I'll contextualize this in a bigger picture. And transportation right now is 2022 is going to be one of the most exciting years we've ever had. The bipartisan infrastructure law is, we debate back and forth the superlatives we use to describe it, but I think it's the largest transportation law in American history. In addition to EV chargers, just to sort of broaden the scope a bit from the environmental point of view, historic investments in transit, in rail, in just a lot of really creative and exciting things. So, we are a department that is just incredibly energized right now. And as you point out, we bring that sort of, or as Michael pointed out, we are the agency that works on the ground with local transportation agencies, with state transportation agencies. That is our specialty. And we are sort of, in some ways, really the driving force behind the surface transportation network. And here is a chance to transform it. And not just surface transportation, we also will be investing, just to put it out there, electrification in terms of what we're seeing in ports and maritime. We're working on, how we can decarbonize aviation. So this is part of a broader set of priorities for us. But I think this one, because the president has set a bold goal, it particularly energizes us. So thanks again for this great discussion. And, for all the folks on this call, we look forward to your partnership and maybe hiring a few of you if you want to come help us achieve this incredible mission.
Great,
well said. Well said. I want to bring us back to something really Manish started with, and the climate crisis that we have to address. Our goal is nothing short of how do we achieve, 100% clean economy by 2050, which means we have to decarbonize the transportation sector across all modes. Certainly EV charging will help a lot with on-road cars and medium and heavy duty trucks, but we have to address every single part of transportation. It is the largest source of greenhouse gas overall, not just here in the United States, globally. There's a lot we can do to help work with other countries, but if we don't tackle it with transportation and tackle it now, we will be in much more of a world of hurt going down the road. And as someone mentioned earlier, these cars stick around a long time, trains, planes, ships. We need to be out implementing now. Right now, in the next 5 years, we need to be substantially deployed by 2030 across this range of technologies. The great news is we can get there. The technology has really turned a corner. Not only batteries, EV charging, but across a broad range, hydrogen, biofuels. So we are extremely optimistic that we can do it, but we can only do it together. And that starts, leading by example, federal government working together across DOT and DOE. And I will also say EPA, HUD, and our other agencies as well. We are working very aggressively across all the agencies together to make this happen. So I want to really give a nod to those groups as well. But this is a once in a lifetime opportunity, and it really is a dream come true in terms of not only we have the funding to execute, we have the organization, and we've got the people with the commitment and the passion there. So our limit is only, I think, what we put upon us at this point to get it done.
Thank you both. I'm really excited to get to work, honestly. What an invigorating call to action. Great way to start off the new year. Thank you both for your leadership. Thank you both for your public service. And thank you both for your time with us here today. We've enjoyed our conversation and just looking forward to seeing the work progress and supporting it throughout the year and the years to come. Thanks again for your time.
Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you, Carla and Diane.
Let's get bold, America. I like that quote.
Let's do it. Let's do it. Thank you all so much. I am inspired. That was fascinating to hear sort of what's going on behind the scenes. So thank you, Carla. Deputy Secretary Trottenberg, more jobs. That's what we all love to hear, right? That's a good thing too on all of this, and jobs that are making a difference in our community. And Deputy Assistant Secretary Berube, I'd like that positive attitude you have about the tech. We can all get there. And thank you both for working together. We talked about that being a special collaboration, but the fact that you pointed that out and that it really is special to have these departments in government finally realizing we got to share, we have to collaborate to make this happen. And when we do, between the energy and transportation, everybody else, and tech, this is going to happen, and we're showing how important that is. So thank you on that. So we look forward to more important announcements from the administration in the coming months as well. There's going to be some interesting things happening this year for sure. And this does wrap up the first session of the summit, but don't go away. We will now take a short break, stretch a little, grab a glass of water or coffee, depending on what coast you're on, but please don't close out the window. We will be right back here on the same link at 1 p.m. Eastern and 10 a.m. Pacific. We'll see you in a little bit. All right, right on the dot. Welcome back, everyone. Again, I'm Diane Dwyer, and I'm moderating today's summit on EV charging. And it is now, we're going to jump right in here. It is now my pleasure to welcome Secretary of Commerce, Gina Raimondo. And a little background, Secretary Raimondo also served as the 75th governor of Rhode Island and its first female governor as well. So now as Secretary of Commerce, she is focused on helping American workers, of course, and businesses compete on a global stage.
Thank you for inviting me to join you for the National Electric Vehicle Charging Summit. Each part of the diverse community participating today, industry, labor, government, is essential to meeting our transportation electrification goals. The Biden administration is taking ambitious action to tackle climate change and set the United States on the path to achieve net zero emissions by 2050. An important piece of that goal is President Biden's ambitious target to make electric vehicles half of all new car sales by the end of this decade. The goal is uniting automakers, auto workers, and the government to propel American leadership on clean cars. It's indisputable that electric vehicles are the future of auto manufacturing, and it's fundamentally a question of whether we want those jobs here in America or somewhere else. As Secretary of Commerce, I want those good-paying jobs here in the United States. We are making once-in-a-generation investments to position America to win the future of transportation by dramatically expanding domestic manufacturing, creating good-paying union jobs, and making electric vehicles more affordable for both American families and exports around the world. And our work is already underway. The Department of Commerce recently announced the first awards from the $3 billion American Rescue Plan funds to bolster the domestic production of electric vehicles in communities that have historically been the backbone of our auto industry. These million-dollar planning grants will lay the groundwork to forge resilient economies and increase U.S. competitiveness. We also know that increasing our production of electric vehicles means we're going to need more semiconductors. The average electric vehicle has more than 2,000 chips. That's more than twice as many as a car with a traditional combustion engine. That's why the Commerce Department is laser focused on revitalizing America's semiconductor industry. Better chips will allow us to make electric vehicle batteries more efficient, capture a larger share of the global EV market, and create more American jobs. Finally, the bipartisan infrastructure laws investments in clean energy technology supply chains will allow America to make the energy technologies of the future right here at home, boosting our competitiveness in a global market expected to reach $23 trillion by the end of the decade. By working together, we can build a more inclusive and equitable economy for American workers and businesses. We can create the jobs of the future at the same time we're addressing the climate crisis. That's why I'm so excited to partner with all of you as we work to achieve our ambitious economic, transportation, and climate goals. Thank you.
And thank you, Secretary. Yep, the key to success is having a coalition, right? And that is exactly what we have going on today. So now we're going to begin revealing some commitments from members of the National EV Charging Initiative. These companies all share a passion and a commitment to expanding access to EV charging. And if we work together on this, we can meet the Biden administration's bold transportation goals. I believe it. I think we can do it. Collaboration is needed like never before, though. We've been talking about that throughout our theme for today. So in our first segment, we get to hear from the largest advocacy organization representing the auto industry, the CEO from EVgo, two CEOs representing the utility industries, and a joint commitment from some EV advocates. It's a lot of folks. Don't forget that all the speaker bios are on the speaker page if you want to learn a little bit more about them and their contributions to EV charging. But for now, let's hear what they have to say.
Commissioner Bocanegra, it's so good to see you again. As the CEO of Alliance for Automotive Innovation, I work every day with auto manufacturers, suppliers, tech companies, all devoted and dedicated to electrifying the vehicle fleet. You wear two hats, and maybe you could spend a minute describing both of those.
First of all, it's good to see you again. As you said, we've had a chance to collaborate and work together, exploring some of these topics. But like John said, my name is Maria Bocanegra. I'm a commissioner with the Illinois Commerce Commission. The Commerce Commission is essentially a public service commission, or often also known as a public utility commission. And what my primary role, first and foremost, is regulating our largest investor-owned utilities, which of course includes our electric utilities, who are vital to the conversation we're having today. But as you mentioned, the other hat I wear is I currently serve as the national chair for the EV working group within NARUC. Now, NARUC is, think of it as the umbrella organization for all of the other commissions in all 50 states and several of our provinces and other jurisdictions. And so together, I lead about 35 plus states in showing commission staff and commissioners education and awareness around the electrification of our transportation sector, and more importantly, the transformation of that electric grid.
I always like to start these conversations with the idea that this is real. We are moving toward an electrified vehicle fleet. And when you think about it, $330 billion of industry investment by 2025 across the industry, vehicle manufacturers, battery producers, suppliers, technology companies, all moving in this direction. Today there are 68 models in the marketplace that are electrified models, zero emission vehicles, battery electrics, plug-in hybrids, hydrogen fuel cell vehicles. By mid-decade, that number will be 130. How do you feel about where we are in this state of collaboration, and where are the opportunities to really work together to accelerate electrification in the vehicle fleet?
When I think of the evolution of this collaboration, it's two things for me. It's alignment and it's allocation. So alignment of policy goals and objectives. And I think that can be done in a way that not only is mindful of states' rights or state policy objectives, but also adheres to some of the overarching principles of things like the EV charging initiative, as well as some of the requirements in the new Infrastructure Act. And then I think about allocation. Obviously, as a regulator, first and foremost, we are always concerned about ensuring that utility investments are least cost and of course, affordable and now equitable to a lot of our ratepayers.
Alignment is critical, right? I mean, we do need to have a plan. And make sure that, as you say, that as we develop infrastructure and we create more opportunities to get great cars and trucks that are electrified, not only into some communities, but into all communities. That's critical. So alignment helps. And to your notion about equity, I do think it's really important that we think about this in a way that lifts communities up who may not have enjoyed the benefits of new vehicle technologies in the past, and that we create opportunities for a more diverse workforce and more opportunities for workforce development. Companies that I work with every day in the automotive sector have supplier diversity programs, for example, and workforce development initiatives that I think can be effectively applied, as you point out, to ensure that we are focused on equity and diversity, as well as access more broadly, to these technologies.
I think that there is a lot of opportunity. First and foremost, it involves, I think, considering what goes into that equation, so to speak, when we talk about alignment, and especially in the context of equity. I'm glad you brought that up. Equity isn't just, a definition of, let's say, achieving a certain percentage of direct or indirect benefits to disadvantaged communities. But again, it also includes making sure that everybody is at the table when we talk about the EV charging initiative. I think another opportunity that I'm seeing is the evolution of really having our OEMs or organizations like Auto Innovators at the table at these commission proceedings. And so I'm curious to hear kind of what your thought is on that sort of evolving role for you guys.
That's such a great question. And I think it's really important. And that's really one of the great things about the EV charging initiative, it's an opportunity for the auto industry and the utility sector to get together, not only to compare notes, but through commission proceedings to make sure that we're working effectively together. So we're committed to doing that.
As OEMs and EV charging station providers, participate in these commission proceedings, the transportation electrification plans that are typically filed by our utilities, every 3 or so years, are also evolving. It's more inclusive of these considerations and things like standardization and interoperability. And so it's good to have you guys at the table. I think another cost consideration is, utilities and regulators are always concerned about ensuring that investments are used and useful. And, I think one other opportunity when we think about OEMs coming to the table, John, is no one is in a better position than OEMs to understand what is used and useful for their customer base and their consumer base. And so I think really having that opportunity to align both of those definitions, both from the regulator's perspective, the utility perspective, and the OEM perspective will go a long way in ensuring that ratepayer dollars are invested in a way that is, again, used and useful, but prudent and it makes economic sense for everyone.
Yeah, we welcome that opportunity, and it really is, I think, an important opportunity to make sure that customers across the board, utility customers as well as mobility customers, have that opportunity to have an experience that's aligned with their expectations and that works for everybody.
Hi, Kathy Zoy here. We are thrilled to be part of the EV Charging Initiative. We share a commitment with the other coalition participants to accelerate electrification of transportation and to make sure that electric for all is available everywhere. Earlier this year, EVgo launched our own Connect the Watts initiative, which was aimed to bring different partners of ours, different members of the charging ecosystem together so that we could share best practice and accelerate the time it takes to get charging infrastructure deployed across America. In Connect the Watts, we're working with automobile companies, charging equipment providers, local governments, state governments, site hosts. We're all coming together to share best practices. The EV Charging Initiative extends that reach, and it's really exciting. As we embark on very ambitious electrification goals, we're looking forward to collaborating even further to reach new communities, new geographies with our transportation charging infrastructure.
Hi, I'm Pedro Pizarro, President and CEO of Edison International. At our company, we've been focused on leading the path to a clean energy future that is inclusive and affordable for all of our communities. To do that, we need to achieve economy-wide electrification, a major component of which is transportation. So I am very pleased to have Edison International support the National Electric Vehicle Charging Initiative. A key barrier to mass adoption of electric vehicles is the availability of fast charging options in many areas. Now, while progress is being made, we need to increase the pace of supportive infrastructure to achieve the critical mass needed to support widespread EV usage. This includes rapidly deploying charging for both passenger and medium and heavy-duty vehicles. Our utility, Southern California Edison, is addressing the availability barrier through its Charge Ready programs. SCE supports charging at workplaces, schools, public places, and multifamily dwellings, as well as charging for fleet and industrial vehicles. Over the past few years, during the pilot phase of Charge Ready, SCE has installed up to 1,000 charge ports per year. Now, with the launch earlier this year of the scaled Charge Ready programs, Charge Ready for light-duty vehicles and Charge Ready Transport for medium and heavy-duty vehicles, this number is going to increase to more than 8,000 ports per year over the next few years, and we aim to locate half in our underserved communities. I am glad to see similar efforts growing across our country, and as a vice chair of the Edison Electric Institute and co-chair of its CEO task force on electric transportation, I am really excited that EEI recently launched the National Electric Highway Coalition. This new coalition of electric companies will provide fast charging infrastructure throughout the U.S. along major travel corridors by the end of 2023. SCE is also part of the West Coast Clean Transit Corridor Initiative, and this is a collaborative effort among utilities from San Diego to the Canadian border. It will analyze, promote, and develop electric charging facilities for freight trucks as they travel up and down the West Coast. Now, this is particularly important to help continue the clean energy progress made to reduce harmful emissions at our ports. Many of our most economically vulnerable neighbors live and work in the surrounding communities, so cleaning the air along these corridors represents a significant environmental justice opportunity as well. Through the California Electric Transportation Coalition, also a member of the National EV Charging Initiative, the state's municipal and investor-owned public utilities are collaborating to foster the deployment of regional EV charging hubs. I am encouraged to see so much growth and development in transportation electrification. Edison International and SCE understand the importance of bold action and regional collaboration to achieve a clean energy future, and we are very proud to support the National EV Charging Initiative.
Hello, I'm Tom Kuhn, president of the Edison Electric Institute. It's an honor to address the National EV Charging Summit today. EEI and our member companies, the nation's investor-owned electric companies, are excited that more than 2 million electric vehicles are now on U.S. roads. That's great news for customers, communities, and the environment. We are committed to getting the energy we provide as clean as we can, as fast as we can. And the transportation sector is essential to any effort to reduce carbon emissions economy-wide. Today, the biggest barrier to EV adoption is not a lack of EVs, it is a lack of access to charging infrastructure that is convenient, affordable, equitable, and reliable. By our estimates, the number of EVs on US roads could grow to as many as 22 million within a decade. This means we will need more than 10 times the current number of public EV fast charging points. EEI's member companies are eager to do our part and to build the infrastructure needed to meet the moment. In December, we announced the launch of the National Electric Highway Coalition. This new coalition is designed to meet the challenge of creating sufficient EV charging infrastructure from coast to coast and includes more than 50 investor-owned electric companies, one electric cooperative, and the Tennessee Valley Authority. Each member of the coalition is committed to building a foundational network of fast charging stations across major travel corridors in their service areas by the end of 2023. The goal is to help give drivers the confidence they need to choose an EV. The EV market is not uniform across the country. Each coalition member will pursue approaches to deploy EV charging that make the most sense for their customers, their company, and their regulators. EEI looks forward to working together with customers, charging companies, policymakers, and other stakeholders to develop options and to build consensus on solutions to address the business challenges associated with building and operating EV charging stations, particularly in the early stages of market development when utilization is low. Already, EEI member companies throughout the country are approved to invest more than $3.4 billion in customer programs to deploy charging infrastructure and other activities to accelerate electric transportation. More than $1 billion of additional investment is pending regulatory approval. Favorable public policies help to spur electric transportation growth, and we congratulate Congress for passing the Bipartisan Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. This new law will make key investments in public EV charging and help to electrify the nation's school buses, transit buses, ports, and ferries. It is critical that these much-needed funds complement and leverage the investments being made by electric companies, state governments, and businesses. EEI and our member companies are excited about the benefits of electric transportation, and we remain committed to building a safe, reliable, resilient, and clean energy future that our customers need and expect. Thank you, and best wishes for a great conference.
The Southern Alliance for Clean Energy, SACE, brings 35 years of successful clean energy advocacy throughout the Southeast. SACE's technical expertise and long-standing relationships with policymakers, regulators, utilities, and local governments are all critical pieces of helping accelerate the shift to electric transportation. The Southeast is rising to be a national leader in vehicle and battery manufacturing, while supply chain companies invest tens of billions of dollars expanding across our region. In order to maximize the development opportunities and address the urgent climate crisis, EV markets must thrive not only in the Southeast, but across the nation. SACE is proud to support the National EV Charging Initiative. We are committed to efficient, effective, and equitable development of charging infrastructure by focusing on facilitating communications between local governments and state agencies to meet municipal EV infrastructure needs, engaging historically underserved communities to ensure everyone benefits from these investments, and advocating for complementary electric utility programs to boost the impact of federal investments. Working with stakeholders, SACE is helping to mobilize the region to achieve the Biden administration's transportation electrification goals and build stronger, healthier, and more prosperous communities throughout the Southeast.
The Electrification Coalition works to advance the policies and actions that accelerate the widespread adoption of EVs to reduce the impacts of U.S. oil dependency. We must accelerate transportation electrification, especially with medium and heavy-duty vehicles that travel along our highways and through our neighborhoods. At the Electrification Coalition, we've developed a robust set of tools and resources to electrify our transportation sector and develop a strong network of public and private sector partners to help advance transportation electrification. With the new federal funding available to expand charging infrastructure and other programs that reduce upfront EV purchase prices, the opportunity to electrify fleets is greater than ever. We commit to working with fleets in the Southeast to electrify their operations, and we'll continue to partner with EV manufacturers and EV charging equipment manufacturers to advance transportation electrification.
All of us know that driving an EV is a lot more fun than driving a gas car. People love the lightning quick acceleration, the smooth, quiet ride, and the easy maintenance. It's important that from a consumer perspective, the charging experience is just as good. Our national charging network must be easy for consumers to use, at least as easy as buying gasoline, or hopefully easier. And it must be accessible and affordable no matter where or who you are. So whether you're in West Virginia or California, Plug-in America commits to making the EV charging experience front and center of an effective process of planning and building the network. We'll do this by working with federal, state, and local stakeholders and make sure that the EV consumer is at the cornerstone of these efforts. Plug-in America, along with our colleagues at SACE and the Electrification Coalition, are committed to working with people and organizations like you. This is the moment for all of us, and we ask you to reach out to us now and help to shape the future of transportation.
And you know, I agree. Driving an EV is a lot more fun, right? They're just zippy. So now we have to make the process of filling up a fun process, or at least not a painful process as well. So now it is time for our first panel discussion in this hour, focused on needs and numbers, the numbers and types of EV chargers that will be needed to support EV adoption in the United States, and what we will need from utilities to make all of this happen. So Nick Nigro, founder of Atlas Public Policy, will lead this panel. He'll be joined by Britta Gross, Managing Director at Rocky Mountain Institute, John Bozell, President and CEO of CalSTART, and Brian Wolf, Executive VP at Edison Electric Institute. So Nick, over to you for now.
Thanks a lot, Diane. So billions are actively being invested in charging infrastructure nationwide to prepare our country for wide-scale deployment of EVs. Before we jump into our conversation on needs and numbers, we put together this video to give you a sense of how those investments in charging have grown from two key sources, government and investor-owned utilities. Whew. So you can see we have a lot of money coming into the market right now, and there's billions more under consideration at public utility commissions nationwide, along with funding from private investors and publicly owned power companies like Tennessee Valley Authority. The question is, will it be enough? So to help set the scene and give you some perspective, last year Atlas estimated that we'd need nearly $90 billion in charging this decade alone to put us on a glide path to 100% passenger EV sales by 2035. we'll need similar numbers for freight trucks. So as you saw from the video, the investments from the Infrastructure and Investment and Jobs Act is big compared to what's been done before, but it's really a small fraction of what's needed this decade. So my first question to my panelists here, Brian, Britta, and John, are about that investment from the federal government. What does success look like with these new federal charging programs? Who wants to go first? How about Britta?
Oh, sure. Thank you, Nick. Yeah, let me just maybe start by just saying, for framing purposes, the 40 billion, you talked about a 40 billion needed for the public charging part of the 80 billion for light duty vehicle support. That 40 billion, we have to always keep in mind where climate goals, where we need to get for climate, right? A 1.5 degree C trajectory. And it's really important that we sort of focus and push this a little bit forward into 23 timeframe. So a lot of that investment is needed just so we can get to this 50% reduction in carbon emissions we need by 2030. So I don't want anyone to think that, hey, this is like a 2050 need or a 2040. We have to, it's really important what we do in the next 8 years. And that's the real opportunity here with this DOT investment. The key here, I think, with the network is to drive consumer confidence in EVs and in the market so that we can convince those tens and hundreds of millions of consumers out there to make that shift to an EV sooner rather than later. And we're talking 5, 10, or 15 years. So it is actually now is that moment to convince folks. And I think we heard a lot of recurring themes so far. Main ingredients in my mind for driving consumer confidence are things like building a very strong backbone in DC fast charging, making sure it's really, really reliable. We do not have a network that's reliable today and confidence inspiring. It's got to be redundant. These have to be bigger stations that you can see from a distance. It's got to be visible, and it's got to deliver consistency and experience. We don't have that either. And yeah, it's more than a DC fast charging network, but this is the most challenging part and the most challenging use case in charging infrastructure. And without this really robust core of DC fast charging network, there's just no amount of L1, level 1 and level 2 charging that we can put in place that drives confidence. And I think, again, with this more robust core of DC fast charging, we can also at the same time focus then on the other use cases that are actually going to do a lot of the heavy lifting, right? MDU, workplace, key destinations, and community charging. Those are also very important, but the core is really significant. So bottom line, what do I think success looks like? I think that in 2-3 years, we are going to be able to sort of talk to Americans, and we can communicate that for all Americans, we now have a completely built out, reliable, user-friendly, high-speed EV charging network that covers all 164,000 miles of the national highway system, including the urban, cities that it connects with, and the rural landscape and the communities in the rural areas that intersect with the highway system, taking us anywhere and taking Americans anywhere they want to go in the US.
There was a lot of descriptors in there, Britta. So it's clearly a lot that defines success here. Brian, let's bring you into the conversation and talk about the utility perspective.
Well, thanks, Nick. I have to agree with Britta in a just strong way about what's needed with regards to infrastructure and what the grid is like today versus what the grid needs to be, right? We're accustomed to doing, and Britta was a real champion. She's worked at state commission levels for a long time. She knows what that work looks like. And we know we're accustomed to working with interoperability, or time of use rates, rebates, things like that. But I want to focus on one thing, Nick, and that's partnership. We have to be ready now with this investment that we have. If you think back to the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act, that put $4.5 billion, to smart meters to really accelerate that program. That's what's happening here. So what are we doing to really partner together as electric companies, other vendors out there that are in the space, coming together to be in front of commissions, because we're going to have to go and make the case as acceleration and penetration goes to a different level, and that we want that to move very quickly. So we've got to be able to think about what are we doing to get ready for that. And I think that's partnership. It's going to be partnership to be able to work with that joint office at DOT and DOE. It's going to be partnership to be able to go and shape these programs at DOT so that they're ready to go.
But I really stop at that and say, partnership there and thinking about the American Reinvestment Act and what that did. We need to be able to move this over here. I'd probably say Commissioner Bocanegra, she really touched on some of that very work at NARUC, working in 35 states. Well, we've got to work everywhere. This is really, if we're really going to use this money to accelerate and, like Britta said, put people and cars on the roads, then we've got to use this money wisely. But I think about partnership, and that means going into commissions together to help shape programs in every state at the commission level and make sure that the grid is ready and able, right?
Could you just tick off some of the together, like who's in that together for you from the utility perspective?
Well, I think that's a lot of when we think about our state commissions, that's really a lot. We've got to think more local, right? We've got to think about the communities that are out there that are already may have smart city programs, may be ready to go. But like Britta said, I think if you're actually moving back and you're thinking about how to carry some of the slow movers along with us too. So to your point, Nick, I think those are, cities, states, municipalities, but I think it's also charging infrastructure companies as far as grid deployment and what we're thinking about that. It's smart grid partners, technology companies as well. I think some of our companies right now are thinking about who are they, who do we need to carry in with us to be able to make the best case, for deploying this infrastructure, because commissions, by and large, some of them focus on it like a chicken and egg routine, right? We don't really have the cars in the community yet, so therefore we're not going to do the upgrades. Well, you know what? It really doesn't need to work like that with this level of investment. And, Nick, you did a lot of work at Atlas when you think about the $800 million that you identified, that we're talking about communities, low-income communities and disadvantaged communities too, and how we bring those along. So how are we bring the slow movers along, and how are we really talking to state commissions that maybe have already mature programs or mature approaches to this issue? But I agree with Britta. That is one of the three things that she identified. I think it's for electric companies, it's number one. And we don't need to go this alone. We all need to do this together. And again, that's the way the smart meter program worked as well. We were using clearly other products that are not made by our industry to be able to deploy. And so we've got to carry those people into this commissions and get in front of them now to be able to start laying that groundwork and making that case for building it now, having a ready grid now, and that vehicle to grid integration now.
John, let's bring you in here. You've been doing this for a while. You were around when the Recovery Act, Brian brought that up, the Recovery Act. We saw lots of hits, some misses there. Fast forward a few years, and we're looking back maybe over a beer on how this program worked out. What would success look like for you?
Well, great, Nick. Thanks for that question. First of all, I just want to say that we should all be super grateful to the Congress and the Biden administration for passing the bipartisan infrastructure bill. I mean, that was a major achievement. This is perhaps the most significant action that Congress has ever taken to address the climate threat. And the funding, both in infrastructure, funding for school buses, transit buses, this is going to do a lot to really propel the industry forward, to create jobs here in the U.S. and to decarbonize the transportation sector. And it's just been great to see the DOE and the DOT working so well together, like I've never seen them work before. CalSTART and our 290 member companies are really excited about this opportunity. And we do see, good priority on the light duty, the passenger car market in this bill and with the funding. I think we also should be aware of the huge opportunity in the commercial vehicle sector. In particular, earlier we heard from the Alliance and others about the new products coming into the car market. Well, there's a great high percentage and similar percentage of new zero emission trucks, electric trucks coming to the market. And that's a huge opportunity. So I'd really like to see some of this infrastructure funding be available for the fast growing commercial vehicle sector. And if we can quickly convert that sector from diesel over to zero emissions, it's going to have a huge benefit for disadvantaged communities, those communities that live near ports, near distribution facilities that are particularly hard hit by truck traffic and truck emissions. And then you mentioned this previous stimulus bill. I think it's really incredibly important, whether it's for the car market or the commercial vehicle market, that whoever gets that federal funding is also putting in money of their own. They have to, the owner operator of the EV charging system has to have skin in the game. And we saw some free chargers basically given away under ARA. Some of them didn't work well, they failed, and it wasn't a great use of public funding. So let's learn from that and make sure that whoever is going to be owning and operating that system does have skin in the game and is putting their own dollars into those systems.
Awesome. So let's get a little bit into why this is even needed. We were looking at that video a few minutes ago. We saw all this rolling up of billions of dollars starting to come in. We also see the context of if we actually want to achieve 100% electrification, we got a long way to go. So let's talk about the state of play on charging. And let's again start with Britta. The market's grown pretty unevenly, I think fairly. Some markets are very strong, some are not. Some neighborhoods are being left behind a bit. And so how do we make, is that part of the reason why the federal investment's needed? Where is it from your perspective, Britta?
Yeah, I think it's that and even more. And I'm going to go sort of maybe recap a couple of the things we said just in that last round. We have a patchwork of stations that have been built up over the last 10 years. And John's alluding to the ARA spending and kind of, there were a lot of issues associated. We learned a lot in the last 10 years, haven't we all? And that patchwork was, a combination of early technology, startups that didn't make it. Those are some of the things that John is alluding to. There are huge gaps today in DC fast charging, just even the availability of DC fast charging. Take a look at a DC fast charging map, the open industry standard, SAE standard, and you see big gaps in Montana, Wyoming, Arkansas, Louisiana, et cetera. And so if you also look at redundancy, there are stations that still have like one charger at a site. And when the site doesn't work, you're in a little bit of trouble because you may have to drive another 50 or 100 miles, maybe more.
Or if it's just busy, right?
Or if it's busy. But I mean, I think that reliability is actually probably even the most important issue right now. So we've got to deal with these gaps. We've got to deal with redundancy. There are persistent reliability issues over time, and the standards still aren't bulletproof. And we've got to make the standards as tight, as definable as we possibly can. So I think those are sort of some baseline things. There's also no commonality across the stations, right? You sign up for the different networks in different ways. I heard that on some previous speakers this morning here too. If the network provider changes out on a station, of course, you have to actually download new apps and figure all these systems out. So the commonality is just not there either. It is not confidence inspiring. And then back to your point then, Nick, yeah, we already have seen equity issues, right? We happened at RMI to do some analysis here for Los Angeles over the last year. And we're looking at sort of how do we see the movement of TNCs, Uber and Lyft vehicles that are gas and electric? Are there differences? And there are big differences, right? The electric TNCs have to do business or tend to do business over there in the wealthier areas where early adopters live, even though half of all rides begin or end in low-income communities. It's a great form of mobility and an option. And yet the gas vehicles are sitting there in those communities because the gasoline vehicles you can drive everywhere. So we're already seeing these equity issues where we've got to bring DC fast charging into these communities, even to support TNCs and fleets and other uses. I mean, a lot of these folks are vehicle drivers as well. We're also not on the pace needed. That's one of the other things I wanted to mention. I know Pedro mentioned earlier in this conference here, their summit today, he mentioned that, they're looking at also the pace of installations needed. My look at the numbers shows, and using the AFDC database shows that we're doing about 600 installs every quarter for DC charge ports. We need to get to about 10,000 ports a quarter to get to the kind of numbers we're talking about in 2030. So we've got vast improvements we have to make. Brian very clearly identified some of those issues. The grid's not ready for that. We've got to start building the grid we need today in anticipation. There's too much money being invested. It is coming. It's inevitable that it's coming. Let's do the things we need to do right now to clean up those processes. And so then just a real reset of infrastructure is needed here. And I guess I want to just really double down on some of the things that John Bozzella talked about from the Auto Alliance. And that is, we've got to put consumer first, a consumer first lens on all of the decisions right now. We know that it's going to be, these are tough things for the parts of industry to sort of accept these rules and the requirements around what this network needs to be. But if you put your customer hat on and the hundreds of millions of Americans that need to be in these vehicles, it's really important to do the things that make it convenient, consistent, user-friendly, fast, redundant, and reliable. And those are the things I really want to sort of double and triple down on. I know we've heard a lot of the repeated messages today, but boy, is it important.
It's put a lot of pressure on the new joint office being set up. You're checking a lot of reasons why they need to exist and such. John, let's bring you into this one. From your perspective, why does the federal government need to play such a strong role right now?
Well, Nick, I think this is critical. This is where we need to, as Michael Barabee was talking about, the goal is to have 50% of new car sales be zero emission electric, basically by 2030. So we need to be getting the infrastructure, everything ready for that right now. I really want to build on what Brian was saying earlier, that the utilities are a key partner in this effort. It is the state utility regulatory commissions that allow the utilities to come to the table as a full partner and use their ratepayer funds to invest in infrastructure. We're fully supportive of that. There are some states that are moving ahead with that. The federal government may want to consider providing extra incentives for those states who have moved in that direction so that they're leveraging more non-federal funds with their federal dollars. The other thing we may want to consider is there are certain states that recognize the climate imperative and are taking strong regulatory action. Some states have adopted something called the Advanced Clean Truck Rule, requiring that a growing percentage of trucks be zero emission by 2030. That we may also want to, with federal funds, prioritize those states that have taken that bold action. It's courageous, it's necessary, it's going to help build the industry, and we may want to reward those states that are doing so. Lastly, I just want to say that on the passenger car side, Tesla has set the gold standard for charging. It is seamless, it is stress-free, it is convenient. We need to move to a one-click experience for everybody to be able to find that charger, have it work, be available. And that's some of the key work that really needs to happen in the next couple of years.
And Brian, to you, in the early days, the utilities, particularly in California, were kind of left on the sidelines with the hopes that the private market would work it all out on its own. Clearly, that wasn't happening there. The utilities now taking a very strong leadership role in building out infrastructure in the leading state in the U.S. And playing a stronger and increasingly strong role in other leading markets. And so I would love to hear your perspective. John mentioned the leverage opportunity. I also want to hear just from EEI's point of view, why is this federal investment needed right now? Well, it's really needed because there's so many. John and Britta both made some excellent points with regards to what it takes. I like Britta's comment about, and I'm laser focused on that, which is redundancy. We need to be able to address the issues at the local distribution level and those systems. And when we think about large facilities of DC fast charging, for example, they can have really high power requirements. And if you look at electrification of school buses and transit buses, and particularly supported by the infrastructure legislation, that'll mean school districts and transit agencies will have really huge growing power requirements. So I want to go back to what I said about grid upgrades, and what our companies need to do to make and accommodate these needs are going to be hugely important and really highly dependent on a lot of these sort of location and specific use cases. I want to bring up a really archaic example that we all ought to use out there, whether it's in front of state commissions or policymakers in general. But let's bring up the really archaic example. If you look at the last really broad scale transformation and adoption of what happened to the grid, guess when that was? It was really the whole broad scale adoption of air conditioning. Right? And the grid was able to really modify and grow from that adoption. This is that moment too. I know it sounds really old and archaic, but we kind of need to use that because it's really
to me, a sad example of the last time that we've really had huge infrastructure expansion. I mean, think about it. And I think that we all ought to use it because, we've got to get these commissions thinking about really how to get in front of this, not where, like Greta said, we're in this issue of not having the redundancy needed and a grid not ready for it. So I think that's what you've seen the California companies, to your point, Nick. I think that's what they have done, is really be out there and aggressive. And that's really, to Pedro's point, what's been needed to meet California demands. And that's going to happen everywhere else. We know pockets of the country are like California. So it's not just a California example. But again, I want us to think about, when was the last time the grid was adapted to meet these needs of, as Britta pointed out, the consumer. We need to put on our customer hat and wear that every day and think about what do we need to do to get ready for that.
Awesome. So we only got a couple minutes left. I just want to close with one quick question for everybody. Let's bring it home with looking ahead. Michael Barabee from DOE just mentioned it. 50 states are going to be working on plans over the next 12 months or so. From each of your perspectives, in about 10 or 15 seconds, what do you think needs to happen for us to set us up on a glide path to the success you talked about earlier? Let's start with John.
Well, Nick, I'm really glad to hear about the talk of technical assistance, because there's a lot of work that's already been done in this space. So we're very eager to work with states and share best practices. So I think that'll be key.
Britta?
I would say we need to help the joint office lay out real requirements for what has to happen, not just casual guidance. It's got to be really firm. We got to find a mechanism to tie funding to proven reliability performance of the new network. We should also invest in some of the systemic issues that are actually introducing a lot of cost into the system, like the time it takes to permit and grid interconnect, and beefing up the grid in advance. We need to be doing these things. And then finally, let's not measure success by just how many chargers get in the ground. I love that Michael Barabee said it too. We've learned a lot over the last 10 years. It's about getting the network right.
Brian, close us out.
I'm not changing from my original statement, planning and partnership. I mean, we have this huge funding that has been made available. And what are we going to do to work with our federal partners to shape these programs that really take advantage of it and accelerate the market? And I'm just planning in partnership, please. We've got to be able to shape these. The federal government, I will say, does not have the best track record with regards to timelines and acceleration. That's why they are asking for all of our help. So please, let's focus on planning and partnership.
Well, that's exactly what we're trying to do here today. And so with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Diane. I'm Nick Nigro. Thanks again, everybody, for joining us.
All right. Thank you tons, Nick. It is really amazing how much easier Tesla charging stations are than most others. And, the convenience there as well, at least in California. We have to get that rolled out across the country. Planning and partnership, I like it. It is also so important that that this electric transportation revolution not only creates jobs, but it also meets the needs we were talking about of underserved communities too. So on that note, we'll now hear from a labor representative and a training program administrator, also a charging company and utility, on how they're addressing equality, providing good jobs at good wages, and bringing manufacturing back to the United States. We also received a bunch of questions from over 300 of you, and the key themes seem to be the issue of reliability. We got to be able to get to that station, charge up, and know it's going to be working, and then we can get to the next place. Charger Help and Americrew are addressing those concerns as well. So let's listen in.
I was about 11 years old, 12, when I was officially an official gang member. I grew up in this pretty tough area, and the people you look up to are not the people you're supposed to be looking up to.
Frank DeLeon was sentenced to 32 months in prison for gang-related charges.
Being a gang member, there's no planning on what you're gonna do. I don't know where I'm gonna be at tomorrow. Tomorrow I could be in jail for a week, a year, 20 years, a life sentence, or even worse, dead. I kind of came up with the conclusion that maybe I want to go a different direction when I get out.
After his release, Frank focused on becoming a certified electrician. He began installing charging stations for electric vehicles.
I've always liked cars. I do think EV chargers are the future. It helps with the environment. What stops people from purchasing these electrical vehicles is the lack of EV chargers and the infrastructure that's needed for them. People start seeing the chargers, they're gonna wanna, buy these cars. Hopefully they do start putting them everywhere.
Frank began installing EV chargers after joining the IBEW, a labor union of electrical workers.
Because of the union, I was able to have medical insurance that covered all of my son's medical bill. He was involved in a car accident. He ended up in a coma for 2 months. His hospital bills were $2.3 million. Out of pocket, I've only paid less than $300. It was a beautiful thing not to worry about monies at a time where you're ready to give up everything to become an in-home nurse. I never really envisioned myself having a job. And now that I'm an electrician with great opportunities to fast chargers, I could just see myself doing that and that'll be my niche.
Major federal investments in EVs and EV chargers linked with critical labor standards will create high-quality jobs, advance equity and justice, and reduce air and carbon pollution to combat the climate crisis.
The Electric Vehicle Infrastructure Training Program, EVITP, provides training and certification for licensed and experienced electricians for the installation of charging stations in the residential, commercial, public, and fleet markets. Founded in 2010 and deployed in 2012, EVITP is a nonprofit volunteer collaborative of automakers, utility partners, EVSE manufacturers, safety professionals, electrical contractors, and electricians. This unique industry-driven collaboration allows the EVITP curriculum to evolve with the market. Collaboration was key in developing and deploying EVITP and will continue to be critical to meet the Biden administration's goals for charging infrastructure. EV charging installation and maintenance is electrical work. To qualify for EVITP training, participants must have a state electrical license or 8,000 hours of proven electrical experience. EVITP includes 18 hours of coursework and a 2-hour proctored exam. Site assessment and load calculations are key, and our focus is safety. A national charging ecosystem requires EV customers have access to reliable, trained electricians and electrical contractors for all types of installations. The EVITP network includes over 1,200 affiliated contractor listings and over 5,000 EVITP certified electricians throughout the U.S. Enough to meet demand today and scalable for demand tomorrow. Collaboration, access to resources, and leveraging public-private investment are critical to the successful expansion of the EV market, and of course, this effort should create careers in the electrical industry with good wages, benefits, and inclusive economic growth. Today, we're pleased to announce the launch of online EVITP courses, which will allow increased accessibility for qualified electricians across the country. This program expansion supports President Biden's initial plan for 500,000 charging stations and beyond. EVITP is committed to the guiding principles of the EV Charging Initiative, committed to providing advanced training and certification for electricians, and committed to the expansion of electrified mobility.
Hello from Brisbane, Australia. I'm Jane Hunter, the CEO of Tritium, a global leader in DC fast charging technology for electric vehicles. The President Biden administration's support for US-based manufacturing is a smart economic initiative. It will drive companies to create American jobs, and Tritium's a good example of the tangible benefits of that policy. The federal government's focus on e-mobility policy in the US has shaped our 2022 manufacturing strategy, We watched the favourable policies drive demand for tritium's products in the US in 2021, and that surge in demand from the US has driven our factory expansion planning so that our US factory will now be finalised before we commence our European facility. I'm very proud to announce that we plan to bring a US-based manufacturing facility online in the third quarter of 2022. We're in the final stages of site selection with shortlisted buildings identified in Tennessee and Texas. This factory will have an initial capacity to produce 5,000 DC fast chargers per year with expansion capability for up to 10,000 fast chargers per year. At full capacity, this facility will double the production capability of our current Brisbane-based factory, allowing Tritium to increase our speed to the critical US market with local production, reduced supply chain and freight costs, and of course, it's going to create both skilled and unskilled American jobs. We very much look forward to announcing the location of our US factory in the coming weeks. This new facility will complement our existing operations in Torrance, Los Angeles, where we have an innovation centre with chargers for interoperability testing with EVs and for customer trials. We have an office with sales and customer support staff and a logistics facility for warehousing and repairs and maintenance. And most importantly, we've recently deepened our Tritium US links with the list on the NASDAQ, and we can't wait to ring the bell. We're very excited to be strengthening these Australian-American ties and establishing in the United States our largest global factory, allowing us to bring world-leading charging technology that is made in America to our North American customers, increasing our speed to market, reducing delivery timeframes, and just continuing to expand on Tritium's multi-year presence in the US. We now have chargers in the States that have been installed there for 7 to 8 years, and they're still going strong, backed by our local support team and logistics repairs and maintenance facility in LA. Thank you to the National EV Charging Initiative for hosting Tritium today. We're really looking forward to continuing to work with you all to support the rapid advancement of clean transportation in America, reducing noise and air pollution, and improving human health and this environment that we all live in together. Thank you.
NV Energy is excited about the future, and we're committed to continuing to add renewable energy resources and transmission projects to help further decarbonization efforts here in our state.
The transportation sector now creates the most greenhouse gases of any sector in the state of Nevada. For a clean energy economy in the state of Nevada, we need to electrify our transportation sector as much as we possibly can.
NV Energy has long been a supporter of vehicle electrification. We partnered with the Governor's Office of Energy to build the Nevada Electric Highway to ensure that you could get from Las Vegas to Reno and other rural parts of the state without having that range anxiety that so often comes with having an electric vehicle.
So Senate Bill 448 in the 2021 legislative session created the Economic Recovery Transportation Electrification Plan. That plan is meant to accelerate transportation electrification and increase charging stations across the state through 5 programs, with a commitment to historically underserved communities and making sure that we're serving our tourism industry. Our plan was strategically designed to help advance Governor Sisolak's climate action goals, as well as President Biden's Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act.
The equitable distribution of these investments and the infrastructure are a top priority for the Nevada Conservation League and our partners. Regardless of race, of income, or of zip code, everyone deserves access to the benefits of clean energy.
It's critically important that we have those important community partners like Governor Sisolak, like Senator Brooks, and others that are committed to seeing a new energy economy born here in the state of Nevada.
It has been such a pleasure to work with a group of individuals that has made it possible for 40% of the EV investments to go to the historically underserved community.
Another critical partnership that we have is with the International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers, or the IBEW, to ensure that we have a diverse workforce that invites every Nevadan to come to work, to help install this electric infrastructure, and to really be part of developing this new clean energy economy.
This career allows them for 5 years of apprenticeship, and for the 20 or 30 years in their career, it allows them to see the future and be a part of it.
The reason why an investment in transportation electrification is so important for the state of Nevada is because there is nothing but an upside benefit for all Nevadans. We don't have oil, we don't have gas, we have abundant renewable energy. It makes sense to electrify transportation with clean renewable energy today.
So I'm so happy to be in Nevada, where we're moving forward and we're doing things to make our communities a better place.
The National Electric Vehicle Charging Initiative is a champion for bringing together multiple industry partners to support President Biden's EV charging infrastructure goals. ChargerHelp is committed to equity by providing access to occupational training and the ongoing maintenance and repair of EV charging stations so that all drivers experience a convenient, reliable, seamless, and secure vehicle charging service. I'm Yvette Ellis, Chief Workforce Officer and co-founder here at ChargerHelp. ChargerHelp launched in January of 2020. We sit at the intersection of workforce development and clean technology. We've built an app-based dispatch and deployment system to really meet the problem of down EV charging stations. What we provide is on-demand repair and maintenance of our current infrastructure and future infrastructure that is to come. In just under a year, we've created 33 new net green jobs. Over 65% of our workforce is ethnically diverse, and 33% are veterans. Our technicians have transitioned from the oil and gas industry, closing factories, and even the telecommunication industry. We have seen tremendous growth over the last 2 years of our existence. In December 2020, we were responsible for 527 EVSE. We only had 3 technicians and we covered 2 markets, California and New York. I am proud to share that closing out December 2021, we're responsible for over 20,000 EVSE. We have 20 technicians in over 11 markets. We look forward to 2022. We plan to grow 10 times more as we commit to the maintenance of the hundreds of thousands of EV charging stations that will be installed up under the Biden-Harris plan. As 2 Black women from Compton and my co-founder from South Central Los Angeles, we look forward to creating more green jobs.
Hey, this is Kelly Dunn, CEO of Americrew. We're thrilled to be part of the EV Summit. We're also very excited to announce today that we're going to roll out a 2022 initiative on EV charging and installation workforce development initiative with our 5 national education partners to train over 200 to 250 veterans on how to plan, install, and support the EV charging industry. We're working across the country, and we're so excited to be part of this initiative because these are not just jobs, these are careers. So we are focused on building the workforce that is leading edge and taking transitioning military and unemployed veterans and put them into what we call our E3 model: engage, educate, and employ. So just in summary, we're thrilled to be here, we're thrilled to be part of this, and we're excited to roll these programs out for our nation's transitioning military and underemployed veterans for great futures now and for quite some time down the future. Thanks so much. Bye-bye.
We have engage, educate, and employ. I love that. Well, right now it is time for a short break before our final set of commitments and panel discussions. So don't go away. We'll be picking things up back at exactly 2:13 Eastern Time, 11:13 Pacific, just about 10 minutes or so. Grab a snack, make a quick call, and come on back for a look at how companies and experts are working to be more inclusive, create more jobs, and leverage financing to make this all happen, right? We'll be right back. Well, welcome back, EV enthusiasts, for our final hour of this first ever National EV Charging Summit. We've been talking a whole lot about collaboration today. Well, the private sector also must take the lead in accelerating the pace, if you will, of EV adoption by financing, building, and operating a national charging network for everything from small cars to large trucks. So next up, We'll hear from a major US auto manufacturer, CEOs from charging companies, and a nonprofit working to electrify fleets across the United States.
Hi, I'm Rick Spina, GM Vice President of Electric Vehicle Commercialization. The National EV Charging Summit couldn't be timelier, and GM is fully committed to the mission at hand. To help ensure the widespread adoption of EVs, GM is trying to take a comprehensive approach to electric vehicle charging. We're committing nearly $750 million to accelerate home, workplace, and public charging, all of which are necessary to support our vision of an all-electric future. Through Ultium Charge 360, which we introduced last year, we're integrating charging networks, GM vehicle mobile apps, and some other products and services to simplify the overall charging experiences. GM's relaunched brand apps for Buick, Cadillac, Chevrolet, and GMC help customers easily find, use, and pay for charging on the go. Now, other facets of Ultium Charge 360 will help create turnkey charging solutions for dealers and for fleet customers. We support more widespread access of both Level 2 destination charging and DC fast charging. None of us can afford to go it alone or cater to a limited subset of EV drivers. To that end, we believe that collaboration is the most effective way to deliver the charging infrastructure needed to accelerate EV adoption at scale. We're currently working with 9 EV charging networks to enable access to more than 100,000 charging spots throughout the US and Canada. This number is growing daily. We're also expanding access to DC fast charging through our agreement with EVgo, with plans to add more than 3,200 fast chargers throughout the US by the end of 2025. The first of these is already live, and the plans include more than 52 metropolitan markets over the coming years. We're developing charging solutions and services to support charging where drivers will use it most, at home. We've announced a line of Ultium branded Level 2 chargers that can easily be folded into GM financial leases or contracts. And GM's working with our dealers to implement a program that will expand access to charging by installing up to 40,000 Level 2 destination chargers in communities across the US and Canada, including underserved, rural, and urban areas where charging is often limited. Now, our dealers have terrific proximity to many citizens and very deep roots in communities throughout the country. In fact, nearly 90% of the US population lives within 10 miles of a GM dealership. It's our goal to put everyone in an EV, and the recently approved federal infrastructure funding is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to meet charging needs for long-distance travel, fill gaps in the national network, and to improve customer confidence. We look forward to working with you.
We're at the verge of mass adoption of EV. Both countries and companies are working hard to enable this energy transition.
As we think about the future of EVs, we at Blink Charging have built a company and a portfolio of products that address critical EV charging infrastructure needs and drive forward the entire ecosystem.
Blink is leading the way. We are growing exponentially, not only in the United States, but globally.
We're the only fully vertically integrated EV charging infrastructure company that allows us to handle all different types of property types and all different types of owners.
We look at the right application at the right time, at the right place.
Whether they're charging at their home, at their workplace, or their shopping centers, they will have the same seamless user experience across all that infrastructure.
With over a decade of knowledge in the industry, we are re-envisioning EV charging infrastructure with new solutions across more than 18 countries.
We're at a precipice where electric vehicles are becoming mainstream and widely adopted.
We have a deep and successful history of working with federal, state, and local authorities on grant applications. In particular, we specialize in flexible models that help meet the needs of the authorities and simultaneously drive EV adoption forward.
At Blink, we believe that one size does not fit all, which is why we have launched advanced charging solutions across the EV ecosystem. Cost-effective and scalable fleet charging, the next generation of home charging, compact and high-performance DC fast chargers, dynamic advertising solutions, and new software to empower a more seamless, efficient, and affordable charging experience for both consumers and fleets.
A coordinated approach is required to accelerate adoption of EVs, working directly with business and property owners,
across providers and manufacturers,
community groups and utilities,
industry stakeholders,
and all levels of government.
That's why organizations like the National EV Charging Initiative and legislation like the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act are so critical to global electrification.
Strategic leadership at all levels is pivotal to propel the industry forward, where public actions complement private industry.
Blink, via its owner-operator model, is committed to spending hundreds of millions of dollars over the next 5 to 10 years to drive forward EV adoption. The key to driving EV adoption forward is collaboration and flexibility. We're proud to support the Biden-Harris administration's historic commitment to fund EV charging infrastructure nationwide.
It would be great if my kids did not know anything about internal combustion engine cars.
Electric vehicles and the clean energy that will power them are critical to our decarbonized, net zero future. As a leader in the clean transportation industry, Black & Veatch has completed design, engineering, permitting, and construction for thousands of electric vehicle charging stations, and the first U.S. hydrogen fueling station network. With over a century of innovation in sustainable infrastructure, Black & Veatch brings the knowledge, experience, and solutions to plan and deploy cost-efficient, sustainable, and resilient energy and transportation systems.
The pace toward our zero-emission transportation future is quickening. The automakers are releasing a plethora of new models of consumer vehicles, as well as medium and heavy-duty vehicles. Adding the influx of federal and state funds to create the necessary infrastructure to power these vehicles will increase consumer and commercial confidence to transition to zero-emission vehicles. What's happening is not a trend. It's a complete revamp of our entire U.S. transportation system. While we've done many exciting projects over the last decade, many more are yet to come. Black & Veatch in 2021 built Electric Island. This was a joint project between Daimler Trucks North America and Portland General Electric. Electric Island is the first U.S. public fast charging station for buses, semi-trucks, and other large commercial delivery vehicles. Designed to handle a megawatt level charging and at a rate of 4 times faster than most of today's fast charging options, Electric Island will be a proving ground for innovation, scalability, grid integration, and reliability to meet the demands of commercial fleets.
This is a super exciting time in history, looking at what's happening with the technologies, looking at what's happening in grand scheme around the planet, all the good things that we need to be doing, and unlocking the promise of electrification. With this, it requires the stakeholders, the government agencies, the private industry, bringing together utilities and the technology makers, all to understand what's the challenge before us, how are we going to get these cleaner electrons into these vehicles, how are we going to generate new quantities that are a little bit unheard of in a rapid ramp rate. What do we need to do as a community? And I think Black & Veatch is really excited about this because we're working with all of the stakeholders and seeing it come together right before our very eyes.
This is a historic moment, and Black & Veatch is proud to be a part of it and grateful to the National EV Charging Initiative for the work they are doing.
Hi, my name is Vic Xiao. I'm the founder and CEO of Amply Power, located right here in Mountain View, California. We help fleets of all shapes and sizes, large businesses, counties, cities to transition their electric vehicles, whether it's an electric bus or a truck or light-duty vehicles. We provide infrastructure that's mission critical and always available. We work with hundreds of fleets all across the country. And it always seems to boil down to 3 main issues when it comes to infrastructure for electric vehicles. The first is the cost of energy. With diesel, gasoline, the volatility up or down is maybe 20% in a single year. With electricity in expensive markets, such as right here in California or New York along the eastern seaboard, the volatility could be up or down by 400% in a single day. So for fleets, unless they have a handle on the cost and being able to budget it, forecast it, they can't scale the adoption of electric. The second problem is that it's not a 5-minute fuel up anymore with electric. It's going to be several hours of dwell time or charging time where the vehicle is plugged in. And for mission-critical fleet operations, those several hours really need to be folded into the daily workflows. And that oftentimes means software integration with telematics systems, dispatch, in order to get to mission-critical 99.99% operations. The third issue that we've run into is that across all of the hundreds of fleets that we have worked with, we have yet to encounter a single one that standardizes on one OEM's products. It's always a mixed fleet scenario, different weight classes, vehicle types, vehicles that are available today versus the ones that are coming out in the years to come. Yet the infrastructure that we're deploying for them today has to be compatible. And that's oftentimes a software integration challenge. At Amply, we build and deploy mission-critical software for our fleet customers to eliminate all of these challenges. And we deploy our charging solutions as a service so that we meet the high mission-critical standards at the lowest cost of energy. We understand what our fleet customers are going through when it comes to infrastructure. Our commitment is to accelerate the adoption as quickly as possible by making the infrastructure simple and easy. In December 2021, Amply Power was acquired by BP, one of the largest energy companies in the world. Together with BP, we are applying global scale and resources to the infrastructure problem on behalf of our fleet customers so that they're always getting mission-critical operations at the lowest cost of electric energy. I applaud the National EV Charging Initiative and the Biden administration for the adoption and acceleration of electric vehicles around the country. It is time to fuel the zero-emissions transportation future.
The transition to electric mobility is one of the biggest economic and social shifts in our lifetimes. That shift isn't just about how we get to work, the grocery store, or even grandma's house. Fundamentally, it's about a historic change in behavior. Volta was built to reimagine the kind of infrastructure that can accelerate and embrace that change. The days of fueling as a destination are numbered. In our electric future, energy will meet us where we are. Our goal is simple: to build a public network of inclusive, reliable, and affordable EV charging stations, centered on the driver experience, meeting people where they live, shop, work, and play. This approach is why we are one of the most utilized networks in the US. We designed a network that connects clean miles to commerce for drivers and for businesses. And at the same time, we're leveraging that network as a powerful communication tool, a message platform that's valuable to local communities and national organizations alike. For over a decade, Volta's founding belief hasn't changed. EV charging needs to work both today, before EVs are widely adopted, and into the future. And it's that pathway that we're excited to supercharge going forward.
If our shared goal is to fully decarbonize transportation, then the shift to electric mobility has to be an equitable and inclusive one. But today, access to charging is too sparse in historically underserved communities. At Volta, we're uniquely positioned to solve for the chicken and egg adoption challenge. Look, we know the cars are coming, and our business model allows for our stations to get there before cars do, acting as a demand pull for faster adoption. And beyond that, our intelligent network can predict and plan for charging needs at a bigger scale for communities of all kinds, rural and urban. Volta is already working with utilities across the country to plan charging infrastructure with an eye toward underserved communities. Just one example, we've partnered with Southern California Edison to help build out charging infrastructure in Los Angeles while providing a communications platform to encourage EV adoption. Now is our chance to correct the exclusionary transportation policies of the past. Volta is committed to expanding our public sector work in support of the guiding principles of the National EV Charging Initiative. Our electric future is inevitable, and the benefits of that future, from clean air to clean transportation, belong to all of us. Here at Volta, we are ready and willing to work with anyone to make that future our shared reality.
Hi, I'm Andreas Lips, CEO of Greenlots, and I'm pleased to join you for this first National EV Charging Summit at this historic moment for our industry and for the country. Greenlots is unlocking the possibilities of the electric mobility future by delivering innovative software, services, and support to deploy EV charging infrastructure at scale. Shell, Greenlots' parent company, has set a global target to operate 500,000 chargers by 2025. And to grow that number fivefold to 2.5 million chargers by 2030. Greenlots will be playing a significant role to help achieve this build-out. We applaud the Biden administration for its historic commitment to deploy a nationwide network of charging stations. We share the administration's belief that all Americans deserve access to convenient and reliable charging. And we commend the National EV Charging Summit for highlighting the importance of equitable charging access in urban and rural communities alike. As EV adoption scales and accelerates beyond light-duty passenger cars and pickup trucks into medium and heavy-duty vehicles, it becomes ever more important to manage charging in a way that maintains reliability, keeps costs down, and delivers value to the grid. Greenlot's industry-leading open standards-based software platform enables effective network management, charging optimization, and grid integration services. Together with our customers, we will continue to create sustainable charging infrastructure to support a resilient and reliable 21st century electric system. I am proud to share with you that next month, Greenlots will become Shell Recharge Solutions, and we are excited to grow our ability to enable cleaner transportation for all and drive a low-carbon future together. We look forward to continuing on this journey together with all of you. Thank you very much.
Hello, I'm Helen Clarkson, Chief Exec of the Climate Group. We're an international non-profit with a mission to drive climate action fast. At the Climate Group, we're making electric transport the new normal by bringing together ambitious business and governments. As a member of the National EV Charging Initiative, we're proud to be driving progress on infrastructure to accelerate transport electrification and welcome the recently produced guidance from the initiative on charging. As the transport sector is the fastest growing contributor to climate change, electric transport offers a major solution to reduce emissions as well as harmful air and noise pollution. Through our EV100 initiative, over 120 member companies, including Lyft, HP Inc., ABB, Siemens, and IKEA, have committed to switch over 5.4 million vehicles to electric and to deploy charging stations at over 9,400 locations worldwide, all by 2030. With Under 2 Coalition's ZEV community, state governments are developing the knowledge needed to switch public fleets to electric, install charging networks, and implement supportive infrastructure. Fleet transition is critical as it provides an important demand signal that can spur rapid action. Our members report lack of public charging infrastructure as a major barrier to accelerating the EV transition. Simply increasing the number of charging stations won't solve this issue. Especially in North America, the transition to zero-emission transportation needs more support if we're going to succeed. We must ensure the driver charging experience is simple, reliable, and accessible. Fast charging stations for both large enterprise fleets and public need are critically important. Currently, drivers too often face situations where charging stations are broken, incorrectly advertised by operators, and overly complicated, all of which hinders EV adoption. These issues must be addressed, otherwise they may discourage businesses, governments, and the public from transitioning to EVs. Our recently released public EV fast charging principles, supported by key EV100 and ZEV community members, offer a framework to build out an effective fast charging network in North America by providing the best charging experience possible. Principles like providing appropriate connector types, ensuring charging station information is accurate, or accepting multiple payment options to allow customers to visit any charging network across the country are key to enabling and supporting the EV transition. With the passing of recent legislation in the US, we have a historic opportunity to electrify transportation and create a better future for all. We hope to see federal, state, and business collaboration to take advantage of this critical moment and drive the EV revolution, starting with the development of a robust charging network.
Okay, with this kind of commitment to EV, it's going to happen, and it's going to be an exciting change for all of us in this country. So our next panel will discuss the opportunities for more inclusive economic growth during this process, increasing the number of stable, well-paid jobs, and address the mobility needs of everyone, especially historically underserved communities. And it will be led by Angelo Logan. He's the Policy Director and Campaign Director for Moving Forward Network. Angelo will be joined by Danielle Eckert from IBEW, Leslie Aguayo from Green Lining Institute, Andrea Marpiaro Colomina from Green Latinos, and Don Cravens from the National Urban League. So for now, over to you, Angelo.
Thank you for the introduction, Diane. As mentioned, I'm Angelo Logan with the Moving Forward Network. I have the privilege of moderating this panel of amazing leaders in this space. So we've heard today from federal officials and private companies that will be investing billions of dollars installing charging infrastructure needed to move people and goods with zero-emission cars, trucks, and buses. The guiding principles of the EV charging initiative note that historic investments should build stronger, healthier communities, increasing access to electric transportation in historically underserved communities, and create inclusive economic growth, good jobs at good wages. But the challenge that we're faced with is ensuring that these shared goals become a shared reality in which the benefits are realized in communities that need relief from rising gas prices, clean air, and good jobs the most. So the answers aren't straightforward, but we have the right people assembled to tackle this issue. And so with that, I have a number of questions I'm going to pose to our panelists, starting with Don. So Don, many of the people participating in the summit have been working on environmental justice, which is a civil rights issue, for decades. The National Urban League was founded in 1910. Can you please place the opportunity we're discussing today in historic perspective and explain why access to EV charging infrastructure is a civil rights issue?
Well, good afternoon, everyone. And Angelo, thank you so much for the question. And first of all, let me just thank you all for allowing me to be here today. The National Urban League is a very proud member of the National EV Charging Initiative. Access to EVs and charging infrastructure is a civil rights issue. I can think of it for at least two reasons. One, environmentally. Secondly, economically. As we move forward and we build our clean energy future, it's important to remember that too often poor and disadvantaged, underserved communities are often the first ones who suffer the most environmental harms, but who also benefit the least from the economic gains, the economic environmental fixes. That is why the National Urban League has long advocated for environmental justice combined with economic opportunity and economic equity. Environmentally, people of color, but people of color, they want to live in a clean and healthy space, but they want to also be involved in the development of that space and the legislation and the policy and the implementation. They want to be part of that. At the same time, they want to also be part of the policies that that generate the wealth, the economics that come. This EV and the charging stations, it will give opportunities, we hope, to minority businesses, to institutions that serve minority populations, as well as workers, minority workers, so they can be involved in the development, in the economics of smart energy as we build our infrastructure. African Americans and many Americans have missed the great economic revolutions of our country's history. Because of slavery, we missed the agricultural revolution. Because of Jim Crow, we missed the industrial revolution. If we do this thing right, ladies and gentlemen, if we do this right, all Americans can benefit from this transformation of our energy, our next revolution. And it's going to be good for our entire country if we do it right.
Thanks for that response, Ron, and really putting a point on the nexus between civil rights and the access to EV charging. I'm next going to ask Andrea this question. So roughly half the US population has access to dedicated off-street parking where an EV charging station can more easily be installed. This means that half the population has the potential to install charging where they live, which is great, but we can't meet our equity goals and make the needed climate improvements if we leave out half the population out of the equation. The federal infrastructure bill focuses on public corridor charging. Who else besides the federal government needs to step up to meet the need of EV charging, like street parking and multifamily housing? And what other policies need to be enacted to increase access in that critical segment?
Thanks so much, Angelo. This is such an important question, and I really echo John's comments on the importance of really focusing on doing this right and making it equitable for all communities. I think in addition to the work being done by the federal government, there's a really big role here for state and local governments to play. I'll just give two brief examples. One is in New York, where the New York City Department of Transportation, in collaboration or sort of along with the local utility, Con Edison, is rolling out a curbside EV charging pilot where they are installing 100 EV charging ports publicly accessible at the curbside in New York City across neighborhoods in the 5 boroughs. So far, they've rolled out, as of December, they've rolled out 86. And those charging ports tend to be 1 or 2 port charging stations. They are located on the sidewalk right next to a public parking space, and the parking space then becomes a set aside only for folks who are charging their electric vehicles. So you can only park in that space if you're using the curbside charger. And that really enables folks that live in dense places like New York City who don't have access to a private charging port in their garage or driveway, because they don't have a garage or driveway, to have accessible charging ports in their neighborhoods. Unfortunately, based on the sort of unofficial data collection that I've done, just looking at the map of where the charging ports are and sort of overlaying that both with sort of my knowledge as a New Yorker and some demographic information based on zip code, the majority of those charging ports are in higher income neighborhoods. And so already in this pilot, we're seeing a perpetuation of the inequities that sort of exist in accessing this charging infrastructure. I am optimistic that New York, in the remaining 14 charging ports that it has to install in its pilot and in later policymaking, hopefully as they expand this initiative, will be a little bit more directly equitable in the sort of decision making about where to locate the ports. The other example that I think is really exciting actually is after a very, very long and arduous fight in California, as I'm sure you know, Angelo, in December, the latest Cal Green housing code was passed. And as a provision of that housing code, beginning in January of 2023, all apartment buildings that have more than 20 units, all apartment buildings that are newly constructed as of January 2023 that have more than 20 units have to have a 40% set aside of EV charging ports at the parking spaces that are constructed in those apartment buildings. So that's going to be really exciting, because that's going to, first of all, just make EV charging infrastructure kind of embedded in new construction projects. And even if it's going to be great for the people living in those newly constructed apartment buildings, but it's also going to be great for people that are living in existing buildings in those neighborhoods, because hopefully those newly constructed ports they can access them as well. Maybe there could be some kind of thing worked out where folks who live in the neighborhood can go and use those charging ports in those newly constructed apartment buildings and parking spaces. But even if not, it just makes that infrastructure sort of more a part of your community. You see it in your neighborhood, it becomes more familiar to you. And then perhaps as a resident of that neighborhood, you're able to more successfully and more clearly advocate for it, right? It's much more easy to advocate for something and ask for something in your neighborhood from your local elected officials or from your local government if you can literally point to it and say, like, we want this, we want more of this, right? And I think that those are both really important roles that the government has to play in sort of taking the initiative to begin these pilots and make these policy changes, but also really listening to their constituents, right? I think that's another role that policymakers really have to play as this EV revolution sort of rolls out and becomes, the way of the future when it comes to transportation. Politicians and elected officials and policymakers have to be listening and have to be willing to acknowledge the places where they haven't been equitable and they haven't made the most accessible choices, be willing to course correct, and be willing to be more innovative in the ways that they're installing EV infrastructure in communities that need it most.
Thank you, Andrea, and thank you for lifting up those examples. It's a great kind of dovetail or transition into the question I have for Leslie. Leslie, it's great to see you. So as it relates to some of these policies that have, been enacted or have been, led by California, I have a question for you regarding California's regulation requiring public charging stations to have card readers that can accept credit, debit, and cash cards. The infrastructure law requires DOT to establish standards to ensure access at federally funded charging stations, but it's not as specific as California's regulation. Do you think that US DOT should follow California's lead?
Yeah, nice to see you too, Angelo, and thanks so much for the opportunity to answer that question. In California, we did, pass legislation that would enable drivers to conveniently be able to buy and pay for charging and at charging stations, right? So we did pass legislation that would include credit card chip readers for these charging stations to be able to read credit cards, debit cards, and prepaid cards. And so in the same way that we are able to pay for parking meters and pay for gas stations, right, the same technology and same transaction method should be appropriate for the charging station. This is particularly important, I think, for unbanked and underbanked individuals who are more reliant on prepaid cards. And so we want to make sure that all folks have access to charging. But I do want to point out that, payment methods are just one piece of the overall access pie, right? When we think about accessibility, sure, payment methods, I think, are really important. But along with that, we also need to consider where these charging stations are being placed. The majority of chargers to date are in predominantly white census tracts, right? A lot of these charging deserts are in Black and brown communities. And so we want to make sure that when we think about access, it's not just about payment, right? But where are these stations located? It's not just about deployment, but accessibility. And, how are we defining access? How are we defining benefits? How are people actually going to be able to not just access charging in and of itself, but I think as Dawn mentioned, right? How are people of all backgrounds, specifically, those that have been historically marginalized, Black and brown communities and communities of color and low-income communities, going to be able to access this burgeoning new green economy, right? And so if historically in the United States, the number one way to build wealth in wealth generation is home ownership, and now we have this new economy where people can actually start to invest and be able to participate, how are we making sure that that's also accessible? And so I think, to answer your question, I think it's one piece of the pie that's really important.
Great, thank you, Leslie. And I'm going to shift over to Danielle. Danielle, thank you so much for participating on the panel and in the initiative. Your voice as a representative of one of the, leading building trades in this space is just critical, and it's much appreciated for myself and I'm sure many others working in this space. I guess my question is really, what's your perspective on this question that I asked Leslie, and what's IBEW's view, and if you agree, why, and maybe expand on that just a bit if you can.
Thank you for the question, Angelo, and thank you for inviting me as a representative of IBEW here today to participate in the panel. I first would like to mention some of the efforts that the IBEW has done to increase diversity among our apprentice ranks. For those of you who may not be familiar with the International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers, the IBEW is the largest energy union in the world with the most qualified electricians in the trade. We represent approximately 775,000 members and retirees in various sectors, and about 385,000 electrical workers who are employed in the construction sector alone. Today, the IBEW strives to be a union that welcomes diversity in its membership, and we believe the differences make us stronger. In 2015, the IBEW initiated the IBEW Strong program, which was designed to enhance diversity by expanding outreach to bringing people in from traditionally underrepresented and marginalized communities, actively making opportunity a reality for workers. Nationally, IBEW has been able to increase the percentage of new apprentices coming into our program who identify as minority or female. 35% of our new apprentices are women or people of color, a marked improvement from 2015. And between 2015 and 2019, we have seen a 75% increase in minority males enrolled in apprenticeship programs. And as a result, 1 in 4 active male apprentices identify as a minority. From 2015 to 2019, new females entering our apprenticeship programs increased by 90%. A lot of this success is due to IBEW expanding its network of pre-apprenticeship programs. These programs recruit workers from traditionally excluded communities and offer direct entry into apprenticeship upon completion. Just to give a few quick examples, in Ohio, the IBEW participates in the Building Futures Columbus Builds program, which works with the Urban League and other nonprofits recruiting workers from the community. It teaches soft skills in addition to offering wraparound services to help for driver's license issues, rental assistance, purchasing vehicles for transportation, and even childcare. These services are available to graduates who enter an apprenticeship for up to a year after they have graduated from the program. LA has the largest electrical apprenticeship program in the Western US, and as a result of their diversity efforts, they have a demographic makeup that is 83% BIPOC and female. In Syracuse, New York, the IBEW has partnered with churches and food banks to reach out to people, traditionally underserved populations. And today, they have 23% of their program participants are women and 93% are people of color. And to respond to the last question, we know that roughly half of the population does not live in single family homes. And we understand that not everybody has a credit card. And to require people to obtain a membership to a particular brand in order to utilize the service will only further obstruct the build out of charging infrastructure. It would do nothing to benefit the population most in need of quick, easy access to battery chargers or the fuel that for the vehicles that we are asking them to purchase.
Well, thank you for sharing all of that amazing work and your perspective on this important and critical issue around access to EV charging. It's tremendously important. So the infrastructure law dedicates $5 billion for public EV charging and provides $2.5 billion for DOT grants that could support either EV charging or fueling stations for other alternative fuels. In total, the infrastructure law provides $13 billion that's up for grabs between zero emission vehicles and other quote unquote clean vehicles, as in it sets up a bit of a competition between electric and natural gas trucks. Where should the bulk of the money be invested and why? Andrea, would you like to tackle that question?
Sure. Yeah, I think this is a great question. And I think, we have to acknowledge here that there's a lot of sort of new information being thrown at people at the same time. Natural gas is obviously much more environmentally friendly than coal or oil-fired power plants, but it still is a pretty significant emitter of greenhouse gas emissions. And so I and Green Latinos are of the opinion that natural gas is not really a solution for the long term. And so my advocacy would be for investment in EV charging, EV infrastructure, with the caveat that, let's be 100% clear here, just because something is electric powered, right? Something like an electric vehicle, that doesn't mean that the source of the electricity itself is clean, right? So there's a two-part conversation that needs to be happening here. I would support absolutely electric charging and electric vehicle and electric infrastructure investment over natural gas investment, but that electricity production must come from clean sources. So we've got to have a huge investment in solar, which can be a huge boon for communities that can produce their own solar, can sell their own solar power back to the grid, in addition to wind and other sources of power that don't rely on gas and obviously don't rely on traditional fossil fuels.
Thank you for that perspective and for shining a light on that. That's really important. Leslie, I know that Greenlighting has been really centering a lot of your work on equity and equity considerations. And so with that in mind, how do you think we should be aligning the deployment of federal charging infrastructure investments and the administration's Justice 40 goals? And how should we track progress to ensure those equity goals are actually met, especially when a good chunk of those investments will be overseen by state DOTs that may not have or may not see equity as a core part of their mission?
Yeah, I appreciate the question. It is quite the question. But so I think where we should start is actually in defining equity, right? And so at Greenlining, we define equity as transforming the systems that disproportionately harm people of color. And we do that by increasing access to power, so 1, 2, redistributing and providing resources, and 3, eliminating barriers to opportunities. And so if you hold that definition in mind and then take a look at what President Biden proposed in his Justice 40 initiative, right, which was to ensure that 40% of investments are going to disadvantaged communities, I think then the next question is, how do we do that, right? How do we operationalize equity? And so for us, again, at Greenlining, for the last almost 30 years, that's been on our mind. How do we actually operationalize equity? And so we've been able to do that through a 4-step process, right? We think that it should really involve a community decision, community-led and driven process. And 1, the mission and vision and values. What are you really trying to accomplish? What is the ultimate goal of equity? 2, equity in the process, right? Do you have the right people at the table? Are you inclusive of all the voices that need to be considered? Are the communities actually going to be part of that conversation? 3 is, equity in the implementation process. So once, part of that ideation is complete, how are we going to be implementing these steps with communities in mind? And the last part is equity in the analysis. And so to answer your last question around, how are we going to ensure that state departments are actually complying and held accountable to these Justice 40 initiatives, I think that 4th piece around analysis is particularly important, because if we have the right equity metrics, then we can go back and look at our ideation process and say, did we actually accomplish the equity goals that we set out in the beginning? And if not, how can we go back and course correct and make sure that we get it right? Because again, these are billions of dollars that are going to communities, and we have to make sure that everyone is part of this process. I do also want to add that Justice 40 is a great start, right? It's a great initiative. It's a great commitment. But in California, we're asking for 50%, right? 50% of investments in disadvantaged communities. And some transportation agencies have already been able to fulfill that commitment. The California Energy Commission, for example, has already been able to commit to and continue to be held accountable to that 50% commitment. And so when we think about Justice 40, or when we think about, a baseline percentage of investments in disadvantaged communities, I think it's really important to also consider that those are the floors, right? It's not the ceiling. It's not like once we hit 40%, we're good, we've done our job, right? It's just the baseline, and we have to continue to be much more ambitious in how we're actually going to reach those goals if we're going to meet our climate change goals and do it equitably. And again, I'll just say that in order to be able to do that, community-driven processes, again, have to be part of the entire, all the steps. And that is how ultimately we can undo some of these historic harms, right? And greenline the economy, as you like to say.
Thank you for that. And this is it's a heavy and deep question, and we can spend a whole hour on each of these questions and each of the topics that you all touched on. But we don't have that much time. And thank you for your succinct answer to that. I'm sure people can contact you and reach out to you to engage more on Justice 40 and the work that you all are doing. I'm going to pivot. This is all related, but I'm going to pivot. And Danielle, you kind of touched on this when you talked about your apprenticeship program, but we know that with the tremendous need and the significant investments that are to be made in the coming years towards the installation of EV charging infrastructure nationwide, the question is, do we have the workforce necessary to build out the EV charging infrastructure? And can we ensure that these investments provide employment opportunities in underserved communities and communities of color? And so I think the pointed question is, lots of folks are doing great work in apprenticeship programs and building up, but will we have the workforce needed to actually make this happen?
Sure,
and will communities of color have access? Thank you.
Yes, sure. Substantial investments in EV infrastructure, are a tremendous economic engine. It will touch sectors of manufacturing and of course construction. And while EV charging infrastructure, construction, electrical work includes some emerging technological advancements, EV infrastructure projects are primarily comprised of conventional electrical construction skills, and any journey level IBEW electrician has those foundational skills. The IBEW has modeled the numbers, and yes, we have the construction workforce necessary. We have surveyed the contractors. Those are the businesses that IBEW members work for, and completed the calculations. And as stated before, the IBEW represents approximately 390,000 members who work in the construction sector nationally. And speaking for the IBEW alone, because that's who I represent, we know the typical manpower needed on a project, dependent on the type of charger and the size of the project. And after modeling several scenarios to install 500,000 charging stations, it will take approximately 5,200 journey level electricians and 5,200 apprentices for a total of 10,400 electrical workers every year over 5 years. And with 390 construction members, that's only about 3% of our existing members. And with the wide variety of tools that the IBEW uses to recruit workers from a multitude of backgrounds, from pre-apprenticeships, like I mentioned previously, but also by utilizing local hire and targeted hire policies and community benefits agreements on large projects, that means that the workers included in the statistics that I gave you in the first answer are included on these projects. Providing a means to learning a skilled trade is a pathway to the middle class, which is achieved through participation in registered apprenticeship programs. Pre-apprenticeships, local hire, and targeted hire opens those programs to participants into high standard registered apprenticeship programs and access to job sites with proper work site safety standards, fair compensation, benefits, and an entry point on the road to the middle class through those high skilled careers that would expand beyond a single project. We want to ensure that we are creating careers and not temporary technician positions. The IBEW has implemented these programs because they show they have proven success in removing barriers to many Americans face reaching that middle class, and it would provide transformative opportunities to communities in most need of first and second chances. And the data is there. Generally speaking, union workers make an average of $58,000 per year, and 90% of those workers have health insurance, and non-union workers across the US make an average of about $39,700 per year, and only about 55% of those workers have health insurance. So the data is there, and pre-apprenticeship and apprenticeship programs are the way to go.
Great. Thank you, Danielle. That's exciting news, and so very hopeful that we're going to be able to get this done. So Don, building off of your initial response, talking about the nexus between civil rights and EV charging, I want to stay on this question of employment and economic opportunity in underserved communities and communities of color. Do you have anything to add, building off of Danielle's response, in terms of making sure that the jobs are going to be accessible to communities of color and disadvantaged communities?
Well, Angela, I know our time is running late, and I'll be one of the last. You guys set me up by putting me in front of these powerful women today, and then having me follow these powerful women today, because I have learned so much from all three of them. And what I heard them saying, and I think to answer your question, is I've heard Leslie and Andrea say very clearly, we have to be clear with our definitions. What is equity? What is success? Is meeting a benchmark enough success? That's the minimum. And then I've heard Danielle just recently talk about intentionality, that we have to be very intentional in the trainings and in what we tell people and how we move forward. We as a country and as a community, we sit on the precipice of an opportunity that we've never seen before. One where we can not only make our communities and our country safer and healthier, our environment better, for us, our children, our grandchildren to come. But we also sit in an opportunity to really change, as Danielle just said, change people's lives economically. And if we do it right, if we do it intentionally, if we have the correct definitions, we start on the same page, we can really make an impact. And so we at the Urban League, along with these wonderful organizations that are represented today, this is what we do. And I think it's going to make, it means to our allies that they understand that don't see the civil rights organizations, don't see those organizations that are concerned with people of color as passerbys, as people who sit on the side and we got it, y'all, we'll do it without you. No. See the civil rights community, see the communities that fight, the organizations that fight for communities of color, see them as allies and as participants, as stakeholders. So as we build this, we build it right and we get it right the first time. We cannot afford to mess this up. We can't afford it environmentally and health-wise, and we can't afford it economically. Our racial wealth gap in this country, the reason why it's so persistent, the reason why it's so wide is because we've missed consistently the opportunity to build equity in our great institutions, in the GI Bill, in the Homestead Act, and in all of the great things that we've done for our country, for so many of our country, so many people just were not allowed to participate. Let's get this one right.
Thank you. You know, as I opened up this panel, I mentioned that the answers to the questions that we were going to propose weren't going to be straightforward or easy. But you all provided great ideas and responses to start to tackle this important issue. And so thank you for for participating in this panel and for all of you do. Look forward to working with all of you and making these, tremendous and important goals a reality. Thank you. I'm going to hand it over back to the moderator, or to the host.
All right. Thank you very much, Angelo. Couldn't agree with you more on all of this. We clearly have a plan. Now we have to get the whole thing paid for as well, right? And we do have to get it right the first time. It's an incredible opportunity we have. I totally agree with you on that one too, Don. So our final panel will address the financing challenges and the opportunities, if we're going to be positive, needed to scale and deploy EV charging in the United States. The panel will be moderated by Ethan Zindler, head of Americas at Bloomberg New Energy Finance. And Ethan will be joined by Jigar Shah from DOE, Michael Linz from Linz Capital and Levitate Capital, and Richard Kaufman from Generate Capital. So on that note, I'm going to pass it right over to you, Ethan.
Thanks, Diane. Hi, everybody, and good afternoon from a rainy and cold Washington, D.C. It's my real pleasure to be able to host this last session of the day today with three really terrific panelists. And I feel like actually the timing of our session is particularly good because to me, the final and bottom line question on all the really interesting topics that have been raised through the day is, how do we pay for all this stuff? And who pays for all of this stuff? And these are some of the kind of fundamental finance questions that I'm really looking forward to talking over with our three panelists today. They are Jigar Shah, the Director of the Loan Programs Office at the U.S. Department of Energy. Many of you guys probably know Jigar from many of his past exploits, including founding SunEdison and Generate Capital, his work with the Carbon War Room, and of course appearing on one of the most popular podcasts out there on clean energy that aired for years. Richard Kaufman is the chair of Generate Now and also the chair of NYSERDA, the New York State Energy Research Division, and a longtime veteran investor in this sector as well, dating all the way back to Good Energies and Goldman Sachs as well. And Michael Linz, a longtime venture investor in this space, runs his own fund, but also is part of Kleiner Perkins previously, and before that, Goldman Sachs, and has made a number of key investments in the electric vehicle space over the years. So guys, I'd like to kick off the conversation by talking about financing of fleets first. I think often when people think about financing, they immediately go to the supercharger networks on highways for consumers or what goes on in people's garages. But let's maybe talk about this in two parts and first cover fleets and then move on to talk a little bit about consumer oriented charging. I guess I'll start with you, Jigar. And the uneducated view of this is, well, financing fleet charging should be no problem. Big companies like UPS or FedEx, they got all the money in the world. They can just finance some charging and start electrifying, no problem. But am I dramatically oversimplifying that? And what's some of the roles that you see for government in funding and financing charging for fleets?
Yeah, no, look, I mean, this is a conundrum that we're all faced with, right? I think when you think about what we're trying to accomplish and how we're trying to accomplish it, I think that there's a fundamental challenge, um, which is that switching out gas stations for EV charging stations is what everyone has in mind and what will absolutely not work, right? So so that is the conundrum, right? As people are like, well, my trucks already come to this location and we have a refueling station there, so we'll just put some EV charging stations next to it. No, like we don't have 3 megawatts or 5 megawatts of additional interconnection capacity at that distribution center. It's not cheap to add 5 megawatts. And so you see, folks like Neha Patel and others like, Neha Palmer, like putting, brand new hubs together. She's mapping out all the different like sort of places on the grid that they could do it. But then, FedEx or Amazon have to move their facilities to that new hub, right? For charging. So, I mean, I wish I could say that any of this was easy, but none of it's easy. I'd say that the other group that obviously that we're trying to accommodate are like Uber and Lyft and the ride sharing companies who have redoubled their efforts this year, in just the 20 days we've been in this year, to switch all of their vehicles over to EVs, right? And figuring out where their drivers live, which are generally, less wealthy than, sort of the average American. And so what neighborhoods are they going to go into and how long are they going to drive for? And so you saw that big announcement that, one group made with Taco Bell and seeing whether they were going to do a deal that way. Some other folks are looking at municipal parking lots. And so I do think that the entire thing has to be rethought. And that this sort of thinking that we have, which is, well, we do it this way now, if we just add some EV chargers, we're going to solve it, is not working for any of the players, whether it's FedEx or whether it's Uber and Lyft or whether it's convenience chargers.
So a lot to chew on there, and I think I want to come to you, Michael, first to get your thought on fleets, but also we'll park for the point that Jigar made, which is, which I think is a good one, which is, is the conventional wisdom that we're just going to basically swap in, the charging infrastructure for the gasoline infrastructure that we've got, or the diesel infrastructure we've got, and away we go. And I think that's a fundamental assumption worth revisiting. It's not strictly a finance question, I would note, but it is an interesting one nonetheless. But Michael, in terms of thinking about fleet financing, and from the perspective, and I know that a number of the investments that you've made have been in EV equipment makers and in some of the charging companies. Is there a role for private third-party capital in fleet charging infrastructure investment?
I think there is a role, but I don't think it's as big of a problem as you have on the consumer side, particularly in consumer EV side, particularly in some of the sectors, which we'll talk about later. So my experience in this space is I've been an investor in ChargePoint, the EV charging company, and in Proterra, the bus manufacturer, for about a decade. And I think the biggest problem on the fleet side, in my opinion, has not been the charging side. It's been the vehicle availability. And we had talked about that earlier. I think that is going to hopefully resolve itself or start to resolve itself in some parts of the fleet sector over the course of this year. And I think we're going to see more and more vans show up, and eventually over the road trucks, although I think that's gonna unfortunately still take some time. And I'm going to give a positive angle as well, although all the problems that Jigar mentioned, certainly the operational problems, are real. It is very different to fuel an electric fleet than the diesel fleet. At the same time, there's some positive aspects to fleets. One is, once you figure out how to finance the vehicles, the charging is much smaller of a problem. It's I always call it the tail wagging the dog, because it's probably about 1/10 of the cost of the vehicles. If you can figure out how to finance the vehicles, you will probably be able to figure out how to finance the chargers, in particular, since you have pretty reliable utilization, right? And if you don't have that, it's going to be much harder to find to find capital. And so I think the other benefit is that you have if a fleet is convinced to buy electric vehicles, then it is and to figure out how to finance it, then it is highly likely that they will, at least for the larger fleets, the PepsiCos, the FedEx, et cetera, to be able to come up with that capital. I do think that there's a role for accelerating the rollout. But I think or government role for accelerating the rollout. But I don't think the financing problem is as big there as it is on the consumer side.
Very interesting, though, if I hear you correctly, problem one is we don't have enough actual vehicles that sort of fit the bill for, at least for, sounds like for short haul transit and delivery, and definitely not for long haul transit yet at the moment either. And then once we do, then you have a certain level of certainty about demand. And so if I'm hearing you correctly, financing should not be too challenging once we've got that kind of up and running. Is that about an appropriate summary, more or less?
I think that's right. I mean, obviously, I'm interested in Richard's and Jigar's view on that as well.
Yeah, Richard, welcome your thoughts, especially in the context of New York State.
Yeah, I guess a couple of things. I mean, you asked the question about third-party capital. So there is an important role for third-party capital, I think, in a couple of respects. The first is that a lot of companies don't want to commit their own capital, even if they're very creditworthy themselves. They have other uses for their capital. And beyond that, I think that in terms of infrastructure charging, as we've seen in other things, we want the revenues from the service to pay for the infrastructure. And I guess the other point is that it's kind of easy to say that utilities or governments should pay for all the infrastructure, but that's not going to create the scale that we really need, or really the efficiency that we need. We don't need a bunch of stuff put into the utility rate base. And there is never enough government dollars to support all the infrastructure that we need. So there's plenty of private sector capital. So the challenge is trying to bring the innovation of the private sector into solving the problem. And as Jigar says, and I agree with him, that there are some things about this that are easy and some things about this challenge that are more difficult that really require a kind of systemic perspective. So when we talk about the electricity system, the electricity system was never designed for renewables, was never designed for electric vehicles, never designed for any kind of distributed solutions. And so there was tremendous value to electric vehicles broadly on the grid in terms of providing services to the grid. But the current approach of just bolting all this stuff onto an architecture that was never designed for it isn't going to get us to where we need to be.
And that would suggest a lot of additional investment that is not even directly related to the endpoint chargers. Back to Jigar's sort of initial point, which is a truck stop isn't set up to have three megawatts of capacity available for someone to charge up.
Yeah, I mean that's true. There needs to be additional investment, of course, but we also have to recognize that the current grid right now is quite, in terms of the structure, is quite financially inefficient. So the grid generally has average capacity utilization, at least in New York, which is not very different from other parts of the country, of a little bit more than 50%. So other capital intensive industries operate at 80 or 90%. So if you can evolve the industry to greater capacity utilization, and electric vehicles can certainly help in that, you're talking about being able to have hundreds, if not billions of dollars a year that can be used to make those investments.
Great.
And there's no real incentives, Ethan, to align interests. I'll give you like a really obvious example, right? There are lots of utility companies deploying Tesla Megapacks right now, right? In the middle of nowhere, fine. And they're getting paid for that, right? But if I wanted to install a Tesla Megapack at a FedEx distribution center so that they could then have a continuous draw, because those trucks can't continuously charge because they're generally out during the same time of the day and then loading at the same time of the day. So unless FedEx wants to change the entire way it loads its packages on trucks, like it doesn't really work, they need that buffer. I don't think that Tesla Megapack at a FedEx distribution center is going to easily get a contract with the utility to provide grid services. Like they're going to say, well, that's a completely different department. Like that's not our department. Like, what are you doing? And so we're going to separately build gigawatts of battery storage over here. And we need gigawatts of battery storage over here to blunt the impact of EV infrastructure on the grid. But that battery storage capacity won't get the same contracts as the other battery storage that's there. It's not transparent at all.
I would just comment and say that strikes me as slightly short-sighted in the sense that, you know, the EV evolution or revolution, whatever you want to call it, presents one of the greatest opportunities for increased sales for utilities perhaps ever to come along, given that you're talking about a tremendous amount of energy usage that would shift from using fossil fuels to using the power grid. But your point's certainly well taken.
It has to be done in a different way. It has to be done in a different way because it requires, a blending of large as well as distributed solutions and a much more interactive two-way flow with the involvement of prosumers. It really has to be that smart grid, not the grid we have today.
Fair enough. Let's definitely talk a little more explicitly about consumer charging, and maybe first question, which is, and I do want to make sure we keep bringing this back to financing, but maybe Jigar, 10 years from now, if we keep going with the rate at which EV adoption seems to be taking place, what percentage of the energy required to run EVs do you think will be purchased at public charging infrastructure, and how much are people just going to charge at their own houses?
Well, it all depends on whether we shift, right? I mean, right now, right, 96% or something of all Teslas that have been purchased with people with household incomes above $200,000. So that is where it starts, and frankly, that's where rooftop solar started. That's where credit cards started in the 1950s. So, that's not unusual, right? But without intervention, then we're just going to keep going down by $10,000 in household income, right? So by definition, the vast majority of people with these cars with 300-mile ranges will have dedicated places to charge their cars in their garages and workplace, and they'll only use public charging when they have to make a long road trip, right? And so that's pretty obvious, pretty easy to solve for. And but what the president's trying to solve for is something different, right? There's a lot of people who use mileage apps, for instance, because they get reimbursed for miles, right? Home healthcare workers, salespeople. There's a lot of people who don't make a lot of money, but drive a lot of miles. And those people, Uber and Lyft drivers, et cetera, them getting their car to not cost 59 cents per mile, as is the IRS sort of roughly 59 cents a mile for the IRS reimbursement rate, but instead be at 31 cents a mile, like Sunil Paul at Spring EV and some of the other more advanced finance operators are trying to do, is a huge deal, right? And so then the question becomes, how does one do this in a way that is not just government funded? Because as Richard suggested, we are going to run out of money one day, right? So if Uber and Lyft want a lot of their drivers to drive EV, are they going to make them take public transit to some central hub and pick up their EVs there? Are they going to put them in their neighborhoods instead and figure out how to do it that way? And then in that case, are we really talking about EV charging, or are we talking about EV charging with the associated car, right? And then the Uber and Lyft driver then takes that car for the 14-hour day that they're allowed to drive. And so for the other 14 hours, that EV charger is empty and other people can use it, right? But then in the evening, when they get back, they have to have the right to charge there, right? And then in that case, as Michael suggests, it's a lot easier to pay for, because if you're combining the EV charger with the car, right, and you're getting better utilization of both, right? Because, I mean, if you're driving the EV 30, 40, 50,000 miles a year, the benefits are far higher. And from an internal rate of return, you're bringing the mileage forward, right? So instead of driving 10,000 miles a year on EVs that last 300,000 miles easily, you're bringing it down to maybe 6 or 7 years that you can fully amortize that over. And now EVs are a slam dunk home run for Uber and Lyft drivers, right? And so the challenge that we have here is that we've got to actually link the EV infrastructure that we're installing for all Americans to business model innovation, right? That actually makes sure that private sector dollars can make a lot of money. And in that case, the public dollars are really just a catalyst to prove out the business model so that then the private sector can take it the rest of the way.
Let me try and quickly move this along. This is too much time, but Michael, I mean, Jigar raises an interesting point, which is that basically that we need to have greater equity in the ownership of EVs than we have today. And by equity, I mean, it needs to become more of a middle class phenomenon. When half the cars, the EVs that we sold last year were Teslas in the United States, it suggests it's still not moved down thoroughly into the middle class. Is that what's necessary, though, for a company like ChargePoint or others to be able to boost the kind of utilization that they need on their chargers in order to make money, longer term? Do we need to have that much wider, more equitable distribution of EVs so it's not just people with standalone homes that own these cars?
Yeah. Just one correction before I answer that question. So ChargePoint itself sells hardware and software. It is not a utilization dependent business model. But I do think sort of breaking down the problem is important. In my opinion, if you look at where most of the charging happens today, and I agree with Jigar that needs to pivot in the future, but where most of the charging happens today, single family home, multifamily homes, workplace, retail, hospitals, universities, et cetera, that's probably 90+% of charging. That is a problem that I would argue is not entirely, but to a large extent solved, because what has happened in the United States is that problem the funding problem has been distributed across thousands or tens of thousands of workplaces, parking garages, multifamily properties, single family properties, et cetera, et cetera. At the same time, we have a pretty clear problem for highway charging, and in particular in rural areas where you have a situation where you have very low utilization and will for a while to come. In fact, the more chargers we put in on highways, the lower the utilization will be. That is a problem that non-government funds will have a hard time solving, okay? And then the other problem that Jigar brings up is in disadvantaged communities. And there, it is not 100% clear to me yet what the solution is. And I think it is valuable to trial a number of different approaches. One is the combination of the charger with the vehicle, and I think it's important to try a number of different approaches and then scale what actually works.
Richard, I'd love to get your New York take on this, especially since it's a very different story in New York City. I know you think about the whole state, but the city, obviously, a lot of folks of all income levels who do not have access to charging.
Well, I'd like to go back to Jigar's point about, and Michael's touch on it, the notion of business model innovation, because this is where we really do need the innovators of finance, and they're already working on this, to work on a variety of things where there are, for example, different revenue streams. And so these would be revenue streams that are different business models that relate to increasing the mileage of vehicles, which of course is very different than the traditional leasing model of internal combustion engine, where you want to minimize, leasing companies want to minimize mileage. So this is turning that model on its head. But you could also imagine revenue streams that come from grid services, both in the wholesale and retail market. You could imagine also revenues associated, of course, from in California or other places with the low carbon fuel standard. And the whole benefit of being able to look at these different revenue streams is it reduces the cost of both the infrastructure and the vehicle. And so one of the things that in New York that we've done when you talk about incubation of financing structures is the New York Green Bank. I know Jigar is doing stuff like that at LPO, because that's really where a government finance institution can work out these different kinds of business models, provide credit, and build scale where the private sector can eventually take it over. And obviously, to plug for Jigar's old company, Generate, where I'm also involved, that's just also where innovative companies are also helping to support those business models as well.
But I think, Ethan, one thing I would say to Richard's point is that this can be a win-win all the way around. And I think to your point, Ethan, around, selling more kilowatt hours. But remember, the utility business model, as Richard knows well, because he tried to change it in New York, is not one of selling more kilowatt hours. It is actually not dissimilar to the natural gas utility model where they get paid for the infrastructure and they don't really care how many molecules go through, right? So if we want to reduce electricity rates, which many people do want to do, then you have to send signals to increase the utilization of what we have already paid for, right? And that requires as Richard suggested, you can get paid DER and DERMS revenues under FERC Order 2222 for the wholesale markets, New York ISO, PJM, and the California ISO. I think we'll be the first 3 to launch it. But then individual utilities also have to provide this level of compensation. Otherwise, I don't know how a private sector investor assembles $500 million to $1 billion to put to work here without those clear signals. And today, there's almost no market in the country, including California, that actually provides this clear market signal. There's some pilot programs kind of through OhmConnect or through, Voltus or through some of these other companies, but you can't build an entire business model on some pilot reimbursement program. And you certainly, as a public service commissioner, can't say, well, this is going to permanently shift the asset utilization of our assets without some sort of new framework.
I think that's a great point, and sadly, it's also the point that we're going to end on in this lightning speed 25-minute session. So thanks for that, Jigar. I think it's a very fair point, though, which is that I think that if I'm hearing you guys all correctly, some greater certainty about what the demand is going to be for electric vehicles, and thus in turn the demand for the electricity to run them would go a long way towards providing greater investor confidence to deploy capital into this space and charging in particular longer term. I realize that's a vast oversimplification of a lot of complex points made, but nonetheless, I'm going to use it to wrap up and just say thanks so much, guys, for joining. And let me pass it back to Diane.
Well, thank you very much, Ethan.
Thank you.
And thank you to all of our panelists today for taking the time to be with us. What a day, right? That is a lot of information we have taken in. It has been a total pleasure to get to moderate this first ever National EV Charging Summit. And I've thoroughly enjoyed listening in on these important conversations and sort of trying to visualize what tomorrow is going to look like. Some key takeaways for me: partnerships and planning. It's all about collaboration at the end of the day and innovative thinking. We can be bold. And today's summit is about bold action. So that's where we are. So on that note, we'll now hear some closing remarks from the National EV Charging Initiative's organizers. That would be Colleen Quinn and Nancy Ryan, partners at eMobility Advisors. And Colleen and Nancy, great to see you. And thank you for making this happen today.
Well, thank you so much, Diane. And yes, Nancy and I are going to wrap up. First of all, we just want to thank everyone for this informative discussion. We want to thank the companies and the organizations for stepping up to bold action on electric vehicle charging. I was thrilled to hear Polly Trottenberg actually endorse the theme of this event. The summit is all about America being ready to take bold action on EV charging. I also just really quickly want to personally thank Diane Dwyer. You know, she's a professional journalist and she's donated her time for this effort. I really feel that she kept us going and she brought a real spark to this event. So Diane, thank you so much for your contribution. You know, we've had over 2,500 viewers in the audience for this summit. It is clear that people are very excited about this opportunity in our country and about this subject. E-Mobility Advisors is very proud to be leading the National EV Charging Initiative. You know, our goal with this summit, as I said at the beginning, was to demonstrate that America is ready for bold action. And I think we have done that. We do want to wrap up today and just give some thought to what we heard, both from the participants, from the panelists. And I'm going to start by sharing with all of you what we heard from over 300 of those 2,500 participants that put in questions about, you know, what can we expect? What will this look like? How will it really be helping me to transfer to an electric vehicle? These questions, you know, provided sort of an informal poll. You know, in politics, the politicians want to find out, what are people thinking? What, you know, what is polling? What percentage? What do they care about? And that's what I'm going to share with you some of those things from the audience questions. First of all, top of mind is the need for a positive customer experience in EV charging. We had many questions about reliability, the need to make sure that these stations are maintained, that there's uptime guarantees. You know, what was great too is that we got some takeaways from our panelists. So Britta said, you know, everyone needs to put a consumer first lens on this issue. Thought that was a great point. Also, we heard from John Bozell, another great takeaway. We need to make this a one-click experience. We also heard in one of our video recordings from Charger Health, you know, a minority and women-owned business that is really taking the time and effort and building jobs around this maintenance issue. The second topic that registered with so many people, and I frankly was a little surprised about it because it's so technical, but people feel there needs to be standardization in the charging infrastructure. They want standards for plugs, for cards, credit card payments, for easy access to charging, and pricing standards. Again, Britta made a great point. We need to make this bulletproof. We need to have commonality. We need to make it a one-click experience. I was really pleased, and you all heard from the DOE and DOT Joint Office that they will be releasing standards. There will be strings attached to this money, and it will happen in the spring of this year. Another important topic that was covered by our esteemed panelists on the needs and numbers. You know, so many questions from our audience about, will the rural areas be served? Also, a very strong need for, we heard it in both the needs and numbers panel, as well as in the equity panel, about the need to make sure that people that do not have their own garages, you know, that live in apartments, have access to charging. And there was a lot of interest in trying to determine how can we make rest stops more accessible for this highway corridor charging opportunity. Another thing that I was somewhat surprised about, there were a significant number of questions about the grid. Luckily, you know, the utilities are front and center in this effort. We are very thankful for their participation and for their sponsorship. You know, only Brian Wolf could remind us that the last time we had sort of a transformative opportunity in, you know, for our grid was with air conditioners. Okay, who could, you know, who would have thought that was the case? We're much farther along in air conditioning, you know, and that was a really good thing to think about. We also had some important issues raised on equity and job training. I was very touched by the video from the IBEW member, former gang member, talking about how the opportunity, to get into this business, to be a part of this really changed his life and really had a huge impact on his family. And that's, I think, exactly what we're looking for in this transformation. And then finally, we had questions about private sector participation. How can we make sure that business models thrive, and also the need to grow our economy, and opportunities were raised, for example, for women and minority businesses to grow. I felt very honored that we had Secretary of Commerce Gina Raimondo. She was here and on to really express the importance of this effort to our country's economic growth and to our global leadership. We heard today from our final panel how important, Jigger, for example, mentioned how we must link this infrastructure to business model innovation. And we also heard from John Bozell that one of the issues that I think a lesson that we learned from the ERA experience was, any investment by the federal government needs to make sure that alongside of it is skin in the game from the private sector. And I would even go farther than that. I would say we really need Wall Street to step up and own the game. So I want to first again, thank everyone. I want to let you know that we'll be sharing all your questions with the Joint Office. We encourage all of you to stay active. This is an area that is, needs advocacy and still needs activity. And, as everyone said, I'm not the only one that said this. Nancy and I feel very strongly, which is why we put this initiative together. We can only do this if we work together. And Nancy, I'm going to turn it over to you. What kind of exciting commitments did we hear from some of our participants today?
Thanks, Colleen. Well, today we heard a host of commitments from the auto industry, the utility industry, from regulators, from the companies and organizations that will plan, build, own, operate, and maintain EV charging stations, and from other stakeholders who will be part of making it happen, and make it happen in ways that are consistent with the Biden administration's values. The National EV Charging Initiative has also adopted a set of guiding principles. They reflect the administration's values, and I think that the commitments that we heard today really embody those guiding principles. So I'll just quickly run through some of the, what we heard today. So first of all, our first guiding principle is that a new level of collaboration among stakeholders is needed to meet our goals. Commissioner Maria Bocanegra and John Bozella from the Auto Innovators talked about how the auto and power industries, historically completely separate and distinct industries, how can they work together to align mobility customers and utilities customers' interests? And Commissioner Bocanegra is committed through her role at NARUC to help educate regulators across the US on the transportation electrification issues that will affect their utilities that they oversee. John Bozella committed the auto industry to show up at the commission and to educate commissioners about what their customers need and want to ensure that ratepayer dollars are invested in ways that are used and useful in the mission of promoting EV adoption. From Kathy Zoe at EVgo, we heard about Connect the Watts and Electric for All, their efforts to share best practices with hosts, communities, OEMs. And Southeast Clean Energy, the Electrification Coalition, and Plug in America talked about the ways that they are working together and facilitating conversations between utilities, fleets, hosts, drivers, state and local governments to get the charging infrastructure deployed and to do it in a way that really meets the needs of drivers and works in the community. Our second guiding principle is that the construction of EV infrastructure should build stronger, healthier, more prosperous communities, emphasizing community-driven solutions and ensuring improved options for people in historically underserved communities. And there we heard from Southern California Edison CEO Pedro Pizarro about how they will increase the pace of deployment of DC fast chargers in Southern California from 1,000 a year to 8,000 a year, with 50% in underserved communities. NV Energy is committed to adding clean energy to power electric vehicles, and to work with state and local government and to collaborate with historically underserved communities to invest 40% of the $100 million it's investing in charging infrastructure in those communities. Of course, this network needs to serve medium and heavy duty vehicles as well as light duty vehicles. Pedro Pizarro of Southern California Edison also touched upon the work it's doing with utilities, other utilities in California, as well as in Oregon and Washington, to invest in the West Coast Freight Corridor, which will reduce emissions from goods movements that historically have so disproportionately impacted historically marginalized communities. Amply declared its commitment to accelerate the transition to electric drive for fleets by providing software that works for fleets of all shapes and sizes. Black & Veatch described its vision for a complete transformation of the transportation sector and its commitment to work with all stakeholders to plan and build cost-effective, sustainable, affordable, reliable charging infrastructure. Amply, GM, BP, Greenlots, the Climate Group all described commitments of their members of their organizations to invest in transportation electrification at a historic scale. We heard from Tritium CEO Jane Hunter about their plans to build a manufacturing plant in the US, and Americrew and IBW's programs to train workers, including workers from disadvantaged communities. Utilities obviously have to be part of the solution, and Tom Kuhn of Edison Electric Institute described how over 50 investor-owned utilities, plus the Tennessee Valley Authority and one electrical co-op, are working together or joining together in the National Electric Highway Coalition to build a cross-country network. And finally, as was emphasized so often, this ecosystem needs to provide a convenient, reliable, seamless, and secure experience for all drivers. Blink described how it's committed to spend hundreds of millions over the next several years to deliver an outstanding charging experience. And Charger Help, women and minority-owned company, described how it's planning to grow and to continue to grow with a diverse workforce to be sure that there are trained technicians available to manage charging infrastructure. So in closing, I'd like to thank our panelists and speakers, the initiative's participants, all the organizations and individuals that stepped forward with commitments, our community partners, our advisory council, and our sponsors. Thanks again to our capable MC, Diane Dwyer. And finally, I'd like to extend a great thank you to the folks who made this event possible, to put it together and got it in front of you. Erica Nelson, president of Social Enterprises, our event planner, and her very capable team, Hannah Martin, Sierra Heron, Noel Sandberg, Corey Griffin, Brandon Triglia, our AV team, Tim Holloway and Jay Holloway, and to Forth for logistical support. And a big thank you to all of you for joining us today and for your commitment to achieving a zero-emission transportation future. Thank you. The summit is closed.